The television screens across Pride Ring flickered with the same looped footage. 666 News had been running it for 3 weeks straight. Adam's body dissolving into golden ash. The Exorcist retreat cutting short mid-slaughter. Charlie Morningstar standing in the wreckage of her hotel, smiling like she'd won something. She hadn't won anything. Charlie knew that now, watching the crowd outside Hazbin Hotel swell to twice its previous size. They weren't here for redemption. They were here because somewhere between the broken footage and Vox's spin commentary, a rumor had calcified into truth. The hotel wasn't a rehabilitation center. It was a fortress. A place where sinners learn to kill angels. We need crowd control. Vaggie's hand rested on the spear she'd refused to put down since the battle. Half of them think we're running combat training. The other half think we're hiding weapons. Charlie adjusted the ribbon in her hair, a nervous habit she had never managed to break. We'll just explain. Again, like we did yesterday and the day before. Explaining doesn't work when Vox is selling a better story. The words stung because they were accurate. Across every broadcast, every screen, every hijacked radio frequency that Alastor hadn't bothered to scramble, Vox had been building a narrative. Redemption was cover. The hotel was a rallying point. Heaven had retreated because hell had finally learned to bite back. Charlie had spent 3 weeks trying to correct the record. 3 weeks of interviews, press releases, and carefully worded statements that evaporated the moment they hit the airwaves. Hope wasn't viral. Violence was. Angel Dust leaned against the bar watching the crowd through the repaired windows. You know what's funny? They're not wrong. We did kill angels. Just because we were defending ourselves doesn't make the corpses less dead. Husky poured another drink without looking up. Kid's got a point. You can't unstab divinity and expect the story to stay wholesome. Charlie wanted to argue, but the lobby doors burst open before she could form the words. 3 sinners stumbled inside, shouting over each other about techniques and training regimens and whether angelic steel could be reverse-engineered. Vaggie intercepted them with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 40 times already today. Her voice carried the forced patience of a dam about to crack. This is a hotel. For rehabilitation, not a military academy. But you killed them. One of the sinners leaned forward, eyes bright with something Charlie didn't want to name. You proved it's possible. Self-defense isn't a curriculum. The argument continued the same loop with different faces. Charlie felt the exhaustion settling into her bones. This wasn't what she'd imagined. Victory was supposed to feel different, lighter. Instead, it felt like standing in front of an avalanche with nothing but good intentions and a smile that hurt to maintain. Then the lobby went quiet. Not the natural quiet of a conversation ending, but the sudden vacuum that precedes something wrong. Time didn't stop. Charlie would remember that detail later. Time didn't stop, but it stumbled. The air thickened. Shadows stretched at angles that had nothing to do with the chandeliers. For 3 heartbeats, the entire hotel held its breath. The rift opened in the center of the lobby floor. It didn't tear. Rifts were supposed to tear ragged and violent, like a wound in reality. This one unfurled. Elegant, deliberate. A doorway sketched in purple light and something darker that Charlie's eyes refused to process. The edges shimmered with symbols she almost recognized, geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. They weren't angelic script. They were older, written in a language that belonged to witches who had never asked permission and never would. Bayonetta stepped through like she was taking the stage. She didn't rush, didn't hesitate. She simply arrived, one heel clicking against marble, as if materializing from another dimension was no more remarkable than entering through the front door. The rift sealed behind her with the soft finality of a curtain falling. Purple light faded to nothing. The symbols dissolved. What remained was a woman in black, every line of her body suggesting she'd chosen to be here, and could choose to leave just as easily. Charlie stared. So did everyone else. The woman surveyed the lobby with the casual assessment of someone pricing real estate. Her gaze swept past the damaged pillars, the hastily repaired chandelier, the crowd of sinners frozen mid-argument. She adjusted her glasses. A small gesture. Somehow it made her look more dangerous, not less. Charming. Her voice carried the particular accent of someone who'd learned English from old films and decided to keep the theatrical flourish. A hotel in hell dedicated to redemption. How adorably naive. Vaggie's spear was up before Charlie could stop her. Who are you? Someone with impeccable timing, apparently. The woman's smile was the kind that looked genuine and absolutely wasn't. Though I didn't expect quite so much enthusiasm at the door. Is the mob included with the room, or is that extra? That's not an answer. No, it's better. It's an observation. She turned to Charlie, and something in that gaze made the princess of hell feel like she was being read. Not judged. Read. Assessed for structural integrity and found wanting. You must be the idealist everyone's talking about. Tell me, how does it feel to build a dream on top of a mass grave? The words should have made Charlie angry. Instead, they landed with the weight of something she'd been trying not to think about. 3 weeks of interviews. 3 weeks of explaining that the battle had been necessary, defensive justified. 3 weeks of not mentioning that she still saw the ash when she closed her eyes. We were protecting ourselves. The words came out more defensive than she'd intended. Of course you were. That's what makes it interesting. The woman walked past Vaggie's spear as if it were a decorative element rather than a weapon. She moved through the lobby like she owned it, inspecting the repairs with the interest of someone evaluating amateur craftsmanship. Self-defense that becomes legend. Survival that becomes recruitment. You wanted to save souls, and instead you've created the most compelling advertisement for violence hell has seen in decades. That's not what we're doing, isn't it? Look at them. She gestured to the crowd, still frozen, still watching. They didn't come here to be better. They came here to learn how you won. Alastair materialized from the shadows near the staircase, his smile fixed and his eyes calculating. Static crackled at the edges of his form, a tell he rarely allowed to show. Whatever had just walked through that doorway wasn't from any ledger he'd read. How delightful. An uninvited guest with opinions about our business model? You'll forgive me for being curious about your credentials. I don't need credentials. I need a room. The woman turned back to Charlie. You do still rent rooms, don't you? Or has this place become exclusively a tourist attraction for the violently hopeful? We rent rooms, Charlie said slowly. But we screen our guests. Understandable. You want to ensure they're sincere about redemption. The woman's smile widened slightly. I'm not. The honesty was more shocking than a lie would have been. Vaggie's grip on her spear tightened. Angel Dust stopped pretending to drink. Even Husk looked up from his glass. Charlie found her voice. Then why are you here? Curiosity, boredom. The same reason anyone goes anywhere. The woman pulled off her glasses, cleaning them with a casualness that felt weaponized. And because I was in the neighborhood when your little hotel started broadcasting angelic casualties. Call it professional interest. Professional interest in what? In watching what happens when heaven realizes you didn't just survive, you won. She replaced her glasses. They'll come back, you know. Not for population control, for pride. For the principle of the thing. And when they do, this hotel is going to become exactly what everyone already thinks it is. A target. A symbol. A place where the rules changed. Charlie felt something cold settle in her chest. You're wrong. Am I? Then tell me, princess, when they return, will you fight? The question hung in the air like smoke. Charlie wanted to say no. Wanted to explain that violence had been a last resort, that the hotel stood for something better, that there had to be another way. But the words stuck in her throat because she remembered the moment she'd made the choice. The moment she'd stopped asking angels to listen and started making them leave. "I'll do what I have to do," Charlie said finally. "There it is." The woman's expression shifted, something almost like approval flickering across her features. "Honesty. I can work with that." She extended a hand. "Bayonetta. Though I suspect by morning your broadcaster friend will have given me a dozen other names." Charlie took the hand automatically. Bayonetta's grip was firm, confident, and cold. Not temperature cold, something else. Vaggie stepped closer. "You smell like angels." "Do I?" Bayonetta didn't seem concerned by the observation. "How perceptive. Must be residue. I've been working." "Working on what?" "Fulfilling contracts, settling debts, the usual occupational hazards of being an Umbra witch." She released Charlie's hand. "Don't worry. I'm not here to collect from you. Your souls are your own business. I just need somewhere to stay while I figure out my next move." "And if we say no?" Vaggie asked. Bayonetta considered this. "Then I'll find somewhere else. Hell is lousy with real estate, but I thought it might be mutually beneficial." "You're trying to convince people that redemption is possible." "I'm excellent at reading fine print. We might learn from each other." Alastair laughed, the sound crackling like old radio static. "Oh, this will be entertaining." Charlie wanted to refuse. Wanted to explain that the hotel had policies and procedures and a very specific mission statement. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the way Bayonetta had named the thing Charlie had been avoiding. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the recognition that turning away someone this honest would make her a hypocrite. Charlie straightened her vest. 1 week, trial period, same as everyone else. Fair enough. Bayonetta picked up a small bag Charlie hadn't noticed before. "I'll try not to corrupt your other guests too severely." She headed toward the stairs, her heels clicking against marble, with the rhythm of someone who'd never hurried for anything in her life. At the landing, she paused. "Oh, and Princess, you might want to do something about your security. That rift I came through, anyone with basic dimensional awareness could have followed me. Might want to mention that to your father. Assuming he still takes your calls." Then she was gone, disappearing up the stairs, like she'd been a guest here for years. The lobby erupted into noise. Questions, speculation, demands for explanation. Charlie heard none of it. She was staring at the spot where the rift had been, where reality had opened like a door and let in something that didn't belong. Vaggie touched her shoulder. "Charlie, are you okay?" The question barely registered. She knew about Lucifer, about the calls. How did she know? Because she's dangerous. And we just gave her a room. Charlie nodded slowly. Vaggie was right. But something else was also true. For the first time since Adam had fallen, someone had looked at the hotel and seen it clearly. Not as a dream or a threat or a symbol, just as what it was. A place where the rules were breaking and no one knew what came next. In Vox Tower, cameras that had been idle suddenly sparked to life. Monitors flickered with new footage. A woman in black entering Hazbin Hotel like she owned every shadow she walked through. Vox leaned forward in his chair, his screen face lighting up with something that might have been joy if it weren't so calculated. "Well, well." His voice carried the static edge of someone who just found the perfect story. This just got interesting. He reached for the broadcast controls. By morning, every screen in Pride Ring would know her face. By noon, they'd know her name. By evening, the story would write itself. All he had to do was point the cameras and let the chaos develop naturally. Vox smiled. This was going to be good content. At Hazbin Hotel, Bayonetta unpacked 3 things in her room. a weapon maintenance kit, a book with symbols similar to the ones on the rift, and a single shard of angelic steel still stained with something that looked like gold. She held it up to the light, watching how it caught and refracted. Then she set it on the nightstand where anyone who entered would see it immediately. Let them wonder. Let them ask. Let Charlie's idealism crack against the reality of what survival actually cost. Bayonetta had read enough contracts to know how these stories ended. Hope was a beautiful thing, right up until someone checked the terms and conditions. She stretched out on the bed, hands behind her head, and smiled at the ceiling. Hell was going to be interesting for a while. And when heaven came back, when they realized that their nice, orderly extermination schedule had been disrupted by something they couldn't categorize or control, it was going to be even better. The fine print always delivered. You just had to know where to look. Outside, the crowds around Hazbin Hotel continued to grow. Inside, Charlie tried to explain to 3 more sinners that redemption wasn't about learning to kill angels. It was about becoming better. They didn't believe her. Not anymore. Not after they'd seen what better looked like when it fought back. And somewhere in the space between those 2 truths, the story that would consume them all was just beginning to unfold. So Chapter 1 basically opens with Charlie realizing that winning is actually super stressful. Because now every sinner in hell thinks the hotel is a gym for killing angels instead of a rehab center, causing total chaos at the front door where people just want to learn how to stab divinity. Then Bayonetta just casually drops in through a purple magic door, looking absolutely fabulous, and immediately starts roasting Charlie by pointing out that the hotel is basically just a giant billboard for violence now. It is honestly such a power move because she admits she doesn't even want to be better. She just wants a front row seat to watch heaven get mad. It is actually pretty funny that Charlie still gives her a room. Even though Vaggie is freaking out about the spooky witch lady, while Vox is sitting in his tower watching the cameras like a drama queen, because he knows this is going to be amazing TV, especially since Bayonetta is already leaving angel weapons around just to stir the pot. Morning in hell arrived without sunrise. The sky simply shifted from deep crimson to something lighter like old blood diluted in water. Bayonetta stood at her window watching Pride Ring wake beneath her. Sinners stumbled out of bars they'd never technically left. Neon signs flickered in patterns that suggested language if you didn't look too closely. Somewhere in the distance, a building collapsed with the resignation of something that had been meaning to fall for years. She'd chosen the room on the 3rd floor, east-facing. Not because the view was better, but because it gave her sight lines to 3 exits and a clear drop to the street if things became complicated. Old habits, useful ones. Behind her, the angelic steel shard caught the dim light. She'd left it on the nightstand deliberately, a test. To see who would notice, who would ask, who would pretend not to see it at all. The knock came at 7. Precise. 2 beats, pause, 3rd beat. Military rhythm wearing civilian clothes. "It's open," Bayonetta called without turning. Vaggie entered with the wariness of someone checking a room for tripwires. Her gaze went to the shard immediately, lingered, then moved to Bayonetta with the kind of suspicion that had kept people alive in worse places than this. "Charlie wants everyone at breakfast. House rules. We eat together." How quaint. Bayonetta adjusted her glasses, still watching the street below. "Tell me, does the mandatory togetherness come before or after the trust exercises, after the part where we make sure you're not planning to murder anyone? If I were planning to murder someone, breakfast would be an inefficient venue. Too many witnesses. Poor acoustics." Bayonetta turned, offering the kind of grin that acknowledged the threat without taking it seriously. "But I appreciate the concern." Vaggie didn't return the expression. "That steel, where did you get it?" "From an angel. Former angel, technically. We had a disagreement about territorial boundaries." "You killed them." "I fulfilled a professional obligation. The angel happened to be in the way." Bayonetta moved past Vaggie toward the door, her tone suggesting the conversation had reached its natural conclusion. "Shall we? I'd hate to miss the mandatory bonding." But Vaggie didn't move. "I need to know something. When you kill them, angels, do you do it because you have to or because you enjoy it?" The question hung in the air between them. Bayonetta paused in the doorway, and for a moment something shifted in her expression. Not offense. Something colder. Recognition, perhaps, that Vaggie had asked the only question that mattered. "Does the answer change what you think of me?" "It changes whether I let you stay." Bayonetta considered this. "I kill them because if I don't, I lose everything. My power, my freedom, eventually, my existence. The contract I signed doesn't accept resignation letters." She met Vaggie's gaze directly. "But I've been doing it long enough that I've learned to be efficient. Clinical. If that looks like enjoyment from the outside, I can't help what people see." "That's not an answer." "No, it's better. It's honesty about why the question is impossible." Bayonetta gestured toward the hallway. "After you. I'd prefer not to navigate your territorial maze alone." The dining room was less a room, and more an optimistic interpretation of what a dining space should be. Mismatched tables formed an approximation of organization. Chairs that had clearly been salvaged from different disasters created a seating arrangement that suggested community through sheer force of will. Charlie stood at the head of the main table, orchestrating breakfast, with the determination of someone who believed routine could substitute for stability. Angel Dust sprawled across 2 chairs, his posture suggesting both boredom and the performance of boredom. Husk manned the coffee station with the efficiency of someone who'd given up on everything except getting the pour right. Alistair sat at the far end reading a newspaper that had stopped publication 3 decades ago. His presence felt less like attendance and more like he'd decided to haunt breakfast for entertainment value. Bayonetta. Charlie's enthusiasm could have powered a small city. "Good morning. We saved you a seat." The seat was next to Angel Dust. Strategic placement. Close enough to seem welcoming. Far enough from Charlie to prevent immediate confrontation. Someone had been thinking tactically. Bayonetta took the chair with the grace of someone who'd sat in worse places. How considerate. "So." Angel Dust leaned over his grin, sharp enough to cut. "You're the witch who kills angels for a living." That's got to be the most hell-friendly resume I've ever heard. I prefer to think of it as specialized contract work. Contracts. Charlie set down a plate of something that might have been pancakes in another dimension. "That's actually what I wanted to talk about. If you're staying here even temporarily, I need to understand what that means. For the establishment. For the other guests." Bayonetta accepted the plate without examining it too closely. "You want to know if I'm dangerous. I want to know if your presence puts everyone else at risk." Interesting distinction. Bayonetta cut into the pancake. The texture was wrong, but edible. The answer is yes, to both questions. I'm dangerous by design, and my presence creates risk by proximity. The beings I'm contracted to kill don't appreciate witnesses, or collateral damage, or anything that suggests their authority might be negotiable. The table went quiet. Even Angel Dust stopped pretending to be casual. Charlie sat down across from Bayonetta, her hands folded with the careful precision of someone holding on to composure. "Then why come here?" "Because I was curious. Because your little revolution against extermination schedules created ripples in places you don't know exist. And because..." Bayonetta paused, selecting her next words with the care of someone reading fine print. "Because I wanted to see what happens when someone tries to build hope on top of a graveyard. That's not what we're doing, isn't it? You killed to protect this place? Now people come here to learn how. That's not corruption. That's evolution. The question is whether you can control what evolves." Charlie's jaw tightened. "We're not teaching violence. You don't have to. The lesson was broadcast across every screen in Pride Ring. Self-defense works. Angels can die. Hell can fight back. Bayonetta took a sip of coffee. It was terrible. She drank it anyway. Intention is irrelevant when the narrative escapes your control. Then help me control it. The words came out faster than Charlie had planned, raw with something that might have been desperation. If you understand how narratives work, how contracts trap people, help me make sure this place doesn't become what everyone thinks it is. Bayonetta set down her cup. You're asking the wrong person. Why? Because you don't believe in what we're trying to do. Because I know exactly how contracts work. And I know what happens when you promise something you can't deliver. Bayonetta's voice carried no heat, just the cold weight of experience. You want to save souls. Admirable. But you can't save someone who's already sold themselves to a structure that owns every loophole. I should know. I read mine 3 times before signing. Alastor's newspaper rustled. How fascinating. The witch and the princess debating the finer points of damnation over breakfast. I haven't been this entertained since that televangelist tried to exorcise me. This isn't entertainment, Charlie shot back. No, it's education. Alastor folded his newspaper with the precision of someone presenting evidence. Your guest has a point, my dear. Hope is lovely until someone checks the terms and conditions. Bayonetta raised an eyebrow. You understand contracts? I've signed a few myself. None quite as dramatic as binding yourself to infernal forces, but the principle remains. Everything has a price. The question is whether you can afford to keep paying. Something passed between them. Not alliance. Recognition. 2 people who understood that freedom was a negotiation, not a birthright. Vaggie broke the moment. What exactly did you sign? Bayonetta leaned back in her chair, considering how much truth to offer. An agreement between my clan and the denizens of Inferno. Power in exchange for service. They provide the strength to fight angels. I provide the angels. It's very straightforward. And if you stop, then Inferno collects what I owe, which is everything. The words landed with the weight of iron. Charlie stared at her plate, processing implications. Angel Dust whistled low. Husk poured another drink. That's horrible, Charlie whispered. That's survival. Bayonetta's tone remained neutral, almost clinical. Your father made a choice that bound him to a kingdom. I made a choice that bound me to a hunt. The difference is presentation, not principle. Charlie's head snapped up. My father gave people free will, and I gave myself the power to enforce mine. We both signed in blood. We both live with the consequences. Bayonetta stood smoothing her suit. The pancakes were interesting. Thank you for the hospitality and the interrogation. Both were illuminating. She was halfway to the door when Charlie's voice stopped her. Wait, the tour. I promised everyone a tour of the facilities. Bayonetta turned genuinely curious. You're still a guest. Temporary or not, you deserve to understand where you're staying. The honesty in Charlie's voice was almost painful. Bayonetta recognized it immediately. The kind of sincerity that got people killed in negotiations. The kind that made them heroes in stories. The kind that wouldn't survive contact with reality. Lead the way, princess. I'm curious to see what rehabilitation looks like when it's built next to a battlefield. The tour started in the lobby, which Bayonetta had already assessed. Charlie explained the philosophy anyway. Redemption through community. Growth through support. Second chances through structured improvement. Every word carried the weight of someone who'd practiced the pitch 1,000 times and still believed it. They moved through common areas. The library stocked with books about moral improvement and suspiciously few about the actual mechanics of divine judgment. The recreation room where sinners were encouraged to explore hobbies that didn't involve vice. The counseling spaces designed for privacy and adorned with motivational phrases that felt like arguments against inevitable entropy. Bayonetta absorbed it all in silence. Calculating, measuring, reading the space like a contract written in architecture. In the courtyard, Charlie showed her the memorial. A small garden. Names carved into stone. Sinners who had died in the extermination. Died defending the building. Died believing that fighting back was the same as fighting for something. We remember them, Charlie explained quietly, because they chose to stand with us, because they believed we could be better. Bayonetta studied the names. Strangers to her, casualties to someone else's war. Did they volunteer, or did they simply have nowhere else to go? Charlie flinched. Does it matter? Intent always matters. It's the difference between sacrifice and accident. They stayed when they could have run. That's sacrifice, or lack of options. Bayonetta knelt by the memorial, her fingers tracing letters cut deep into stone. You see heroes. I see people who ran out of choices and called it conviction. You don't know that. No, but I know how people rationalize when they're trapped. I've done it myself. Bayonetta stood brushing dust from her hands. Your memorial is beautiful, but it won't resurrect anyone, and it won't stop the next fight. It's not supposed to stop anything. It's supposed to remind us why we fight. Purpose through grief. Very human. Bayonetta's tone wasn't mocking. If anything, it carried a note of something that might have been respect. Dangerous, though. Grief makes terrible strategy. They moved back inside. Charlie showed her the upper floors. Guest rooms arranged with care. Spaces designed to feel safe rather than opulent. Every detail calculated to suggest that transformation was possible, that hell didn't have to be hell if people just tried hard enough. In one hallway, Charlie paused by a window. Outside, the masses still gathered, still waiting, still hoping for something the establishment never promised to provide. They'll leave eventually, Charlie murmured more to herself than Bayonetta. Once they realize we're not what they think we are. Will they? Or will they stay until you become exactly what they need you to be? Charlie turned sharply. We won't. Everyone says that. Right up until the first compromise. Then the second. Then the point where you can't remember what you were protecting in the first place. Bayonetta gestured to the crowd below. They're not waiting for you to prove them wrong. They're waiting for you to accept that they're right. I won't turn this place into a training ground. Then you'll have to turn them away, repeatedly, constantly, until they decide you're either useless or an obstacle. Bayonetta's expression remained neutral, stating facts rather than making threats. Neither option ends well for idealists. Charlie's hands clenched. Why are you here? Really? Because if it's just to tear down everything we're trying to build? I'm here because I need somewhere to stay while I figure out my next contract. Somewhere that won't ask too many questions. Somewhere that's already covered in enough angelic residue that a little more won't raise alarms. Bayonetta met Charlie's gaze without flinching. I'm using you. Same as everyone else who walks through those doors. The difference is, I'm honest about it. The confession should have made Charlie angry. Instead, it seemed to settle something. A recognition that honesty, even brutal honesty, was preferable to well-meaning lies. 1 week. Charlie repeated, her voice steady. After that, we reassess. Fair terms. Bayonetta offered her hand. I'll try to minimize collateral damage. They shook. Charlie's grip was stronger than it had been the night before, learning fast. Good. She'd need that strength for what was coming. As they walked back toward the main floor, Bayonetta felt it. A familiar pressure at the base of her skull. Cold spreading through her fingertips. The weight of Inferno distant but present, reminding her that contracts didn't pause for tourism. She'd been away from her obligations for 36 hours. The leash was beginning to tighten. In Vox's tower, screens flickered with new footage. The breakfast conversation captured through cameras no one had bothered to sweep for. The tour documented in fragments, Charlie's desperation, Bayonetta's cold assessment. Every word, every gesture, every crack in the foundation. Vox leaned forward, his processors analyzing tone and subtext. This was better than he'd anticipated. The witch wasn't just dangerous. She was a catalyst. Every conversation with her pushed Charlie further toward the edge of compromise. Every honest admission made the princess look weaker. Perfect content. All he needed to do was frame it correctly. Once We Get Up There began playing in his editing suite. The V's anthem. Their promise. Their claim to power. But maybe it needed an update. Maybe the story wasn't about conquest anymore. Maybe it was about watching someone else's dream collapse while he held the cameras. Vox began crafting headlines, testing narratives, building the story that would turn Bayonetta from guest into symbol. The angel killer, the contract witch, the woman who read fine print while hell burned. By evening, Pride Ring would know her name. By midnight, they'd know her purpose. And by morning, Charlie would realize that hospitality had become hostage situation. All in good time, all with perfect pacing, all for the ratings. Vox grinned at his screens. The show was just beginning. Back at Hazbin, Bayonetta retreated to her room. The pressure in her skull hadn't faded. If anything, it had intensified. She had days at most before Inferno demanded payment. Before the pact pulled her back into the cycle of hunt and kill and hunt again. She could leave now. Should leave now. Staying created complications. Staying dragged Charlie's establishment into something it wasn't equipped to handle. But curiosity was a curse, and Bayonetta had never been good at walking away from interesting problems. She picked up the angelic steel shard, felt its weight, its permanence. A reminder that divine didn't mean invulnerable. Somewhere above heaven was making decisions, calculating responses, deciding whether Pride Ring's little rebellion warranted correction or annihilation. And somewhere below, Inferno waited with the patience of something that had already won. Bayonetta sat on the edge of her bed, the shard balanced on her palm. She'd signed her name in blood at 16. 20 years of hunting. 20 years of fulfilling clauses written in languages that predated mercy. The fine print was always the same. Power now, payment later, no refunds, no exceptions. She wondered briefly what Charlie would think if she knew the full terms. If she understood that every demon Bayonetta summoned was a creature that would eventually consume her if the balance shifted. Probably the same thing she thought about her own father's bargain. That surely there was a way out. That surely good intentions could override bad contracts. Sweet, naive, doomed to learn otherwise. Bayonetta set the shard back on the nightstand. Tomorrow she'd demonstrate. Just a small display. Nothing that would alarm. Nothing that would require summoning. Just enough to show Charlie what professional obligation actually looked like. The princess wanted to understand fine. Bayonetta would teach. Not because she believed in what Charlie was building, but because watching hope crack under the weight of reality was its own kind of education. And if that education saved Charlie's life when heaven returned, well, even witches had principles about not letting useful people die for stupid reasons. The cold in her fingers spread to her wrists. Inferno counting hours, tallying debts, waiting for her to slip. Not yet, Bayonetta thought. I have a week. That's enough time to see how this story breaks. Outside her window, Pride Ring continued its endless cycle. Sin and punishment, hope and entropy. The same patterns wearing different masks. Inside, Bayonetta closed her eyes and felt the weight of every angel she'd ever killed. Every contract clause fulfilled. Every step closer to the moment when Inferno would stop asking and start collecting. The price was always due. The only question was when. For now, she had breakfast invitations and mandatory tours and a princess who thought honesty could substitute for power. It wouldn't save anyone, but it might be interesting to watch. All right, Chapter 2 starts with Bayonetta waking up and immediately testing everyone. She leaves raw angel steel on her nightstand just to see who will panic first. It is such a power move. Vaggie reacts right away, while Alastair just sits there at breakfast, enjoying the chaos. He finally found someone who gets that life is messy and never really fair. What hits harder is how Bayonetta talks to Charlie. She gently but clearly pokes holes in Charlie's dream and reminds her that hope is nice, but reading the fine print is what actually keeps you alive. When she looks at the memorial and says those people were probably not heroes, just victims who ran out of options, it is a rough truth that Charlie does not want to hear. The funny and scary part is happening in the background. While Charlie is stressing and trying to prove the hotel is peaceful, Vox is up in his tower watching everything like a creepy director. He is already shaping the story, turning Bayonetta into the face of a violent revolution. She does not even care about just so he can ruin the message before it even begins. The broadcast began at noon. Not because noon meant anything in hell, but because Vox understood that timing was performance art. The lunch hour, when sinners paused between sins, when attention was available for purchase. The opening graphic was slick, professional. A silhouette of Bayonetta stepping through purple light rendered in sharp blacks and electric blues. Text overlaid in fonts that suggested authority without claiming it. Angel Killer checks into Hazbin. What it means for Pride Ring. Exclusive footage. Vox appeared on screen, his face displaying the particular smile that audiences had learned to trust. Not because it was honest, but because it was consistent. Good afternoon, Pride. Today we discuss a development that changes everything you thought you knew about the recent extermination disruption. His voice carried the measured cadence of someone delivering news rather than shaping it. 24 hours ago, an entity arrived at Hazbin through methods that defy standard dimensional transit. Our cameras captured the moment. The footage rolled. Bayonetta's entrance reframed. Gone were the awkward crowd arguments. Removed was Charlie's exhaustion. What remained was the rift itself, purple and ancient, and a woman stepping through with the confidence of someone who owned every shadow she touched. Vox's commentary continued over the images. Witnesses report angelic residue, umbra sigils, and this. He zoomed in on Bayonetta's expression as she surveyed the lobby. The angle made curiosity look like assessment, made observation look like targeting. Sources confirm she's stayed at the establishment since arrival. Why the princess claims hospitality. But consider what we know about Hazbin's recent history. Defended by force, angels eliminated. A precedent established that violence answers divine authority. Cut to footage from 3 weeks prior. The battle, carefully edited. Every defensive stance reframed as aggression. Every survival instinct presented as strategy. Vox never claimed the footage showed offense. He simply arranged the images until viewers drew that conclusion themselves. Now ask yourself. Vox leaned into the camera. What kind of guest brings dimensional transit and angel residue to a place already marked by heaven coincidence or consolidation? The broadcast cut to commercial. 60 seconds of products no one needed, giving the implications time to metastasize in viewers' minds. At Hazbin. Charlie stood in her office watching the feed with the expression of someone watching their life's work get dissected for entertainment. Vaggie paced behind her, hands clenched. He's lying, Vaggie stated flatly. No. Charlie's voice was hollow. He's not. That's worse. Everything he showed happened. He just removed context. Context doesn't fit in sound bites. Charlie rewound the footage, watching herself get erased from the narrative frame by frame. He's making it look like we invited her, like she's part of some plan. Angel Dust leaned against the doorframe. I mean, technically, we did invite her to stay. For rehabilitation, not recruitment. Yeah, well, good luck explaining that in less than 10 seconds before he cuts to another shot of her looking dangerous. The broadcast resumed. Vox had moved on to analysis. Charts appeared showing the timeline. Extermination disruption marked in red. Bayonetta's arrival marked in purple. The visual proximity suggested causation without requiring words. The question Hell deserves answered. Vox continued, his tone shifting from reporter to concerned citizen. Is what happens next. Heaven has maintained extermination schedules for centuries. Now that schedule is broken. Now Pride Ring has a fortress. And now that fortress has a resident who specializes in precisely the kind of entities Heaven sends to maintain order. He paused. Perfect timing. Perfect weight. Does that sound like redemption, or does it sound like escalation? The screen displayed a phone number. A call-in line. Vox inviting Hell to weigh in, to participate, to become co-authors of the narrative he was constructing. Charlie turned off the monitor. The silence felt worse than the broadcast. We need to respond, Vaggie stated. Go on air. Explain. He'll edit it. Make it look defensive. Or worse, make it look like we're hiding something. Charlie sank into her chair. Every word I say becomes ammunition. Husk appeared in the doorway with a bottle. Welcome to media warfare, where truth is just raw material for better lies. We're not lying. Doesn't matter. He controls the cameras. That means he controls what people remember. Alastor's voice drifted from the hallway, accompanied by the crackle of old radio static. How delightful. Young Vox has finally learned subtlety. I was beginning to think his generation had forgotten the art of suggestion. He materialized in the office doorway, leaning against the frame with the casual interest of someone enjoying theater. Though I must say, framing truth as conspiracy is rather elegant. More effective than outright fabrication, harder to disprove. This isn't entertainment, Charlie snapped. No, my dear, it's education. Vox is teaching Hell how to see what he wants them to see. The fact that it destroys your reputation is merely collateral benefit. Alistair's grin never wavered. The truly impressive part is that he hasn't said anything actionable. No direct accusations. No false claims. Just arrangement. Can you interfere? Vaggie asked. Scramble his signal. Something. Alastor considered this with theatrical deliberation. I could. But where's the entertainment in preventing conflict? A good show needs tension, and this, he gestured vaguely toward the now dark monitor, is excellent tension. People's lives are at stake. Yes, that's what makes it interesting. Alastor tipped an invisible hat. Besides, interfering now would only confirm Vox's narrative. That Hazbin operates through force and manipulation. Better to let him overextend. Pride comes before the fall, even for television personalities. He vanished, leaving behind only static and the faint scent of burning radio tubes. Charlie stared at the empty doorway. I hate that he's right. He's not right, Vaggie insisted. He's just strategically useless. Same result. Across Pride Ring screens multiplied the message. Vox's broadcast played in bars on street corners, in spaces where sinners gathered to pretend community mattered. Every viewing added weight. Every share transformed speculation into consensus. By evening, the nickname had caught fire. Angel Killer. Whispered in tones ranging from admiration to terror. Bayonetta became shorthand for something larger. Resistance. Capability. The possibility that Hell could bite back. In her room, Bayonetta watched the broadcast on a tablet she'd borrowed without asking. She registered Vox's techniques with professional appreciation. The editing was competent. The framing served its purpose. He'd made her dangerous without making her sympathetic, useful without making her controllable. Effective propaganda. She'd seen worse. The tablet buzzed with notifications. Hell's social networks, such as they were, erupting with commentary. Half the responses praised her. The other half demanded her removal. Both sides missed the point entirely. She wasn't here to lead a resistance. She wasn't here to validate anyone's rebellion fantasies. She was here because staying anywhere else meant dealing with questions she didn't feel like answering. But Vox had made that irrelevant. Intent didn't matter when narrative decided meaning. A knock interrupted her analysis. Not Vaggie's military precision, not Charlie's hopeful rhythm. This one was casual, performative. Someone who knocked because social convention required it, not because they expected permission. "It's open." Angel Dust entered carrying 2 glasses and a bottle that suggested he'd raided Husk's private collection. "Figured you could use a drink. What with being the most famous bitch in hell and all." Bayonetta accepted a glass. "Fame wasn't my objective. Never is. That's what makes it stick." Angel sprawled across the chair by the window, his posture suggesting relaxation, while his eyes stayed sharp. "So, you gonna do anything about Vox turning you into a recruitment poster?" "Should I?" Most people would. "Defend their reputation, clarify intent, standard damage control. Most people care what strangers think." Bayonetta sipped the drink. It was terrible. She finished it. "Vox is doing exactly what I expected someone like him to do. Exploit opportunity, build narrative, position himself as the authority on interpreting events he barely understands. And that doesn't bother you." "It's predictable. Predictable things rarely bother me." She set down the glass. "What bothers me is when people act against their own interests while convinced they're being strategic." Angel refilled both glasses without asking. "You think Charlie's acting against her interests? I think she's trying to win a war she doesn't realize she's fighting. Vox isn't attacking her establishment. He's attacking the story she tells about it. And stories don't defend themselves with facts. So what defends them? Better stories, more compelling narratives, or..." Bayonetta paused, considering how much honesty to offer. "Or accepting that some battles aren't worth fighting, because the cost of winning destroys what you were protecting." Angel studied her over the rim of his glass. "That's the most depressing thing I've heard all week. And I work here." Realism often is. They drank in silence for a moment. Outside Pride Ring continued its evening routines. Neon flickered. Violence sparked. The eternal cycle of sin and consequence grinding forward without judgment or mercy. "For what it's worth," Angel eventually offered, "I don't think you're here to start a war." "Then you're smarter than most." Low bar. He stood leaving the bottle. "But heads up, Vaggie's convinced you're a threat. Charlie's convinced you're a test, and Alastair's convinced you're entertainment. None of those assessments end well for long-term residency." "I'm aware. Just checking." Angel headed for the door, paused. "Also that shard you left on the nightstand, subtle as a brick through a window. If that's your idea of not attracting attention, we need to have a conversation about your definition of subtle." He left before she could respond. The door clicked shut with finality. Bayonetta turned back to the tablet. The broadcast had moved into its second hour. Call-in segments. Viewers sharing theories. Each voice adding another layer to the narrative Vox was constructing. She recognized the pattern. She'd seen it play out in other contexts, other conflicts. The moment when speculation became accepted, fact. Not through evidence, but through repetition. Say something often enough, frame it consistently enough, and truth became whatever the majority remembered. Vox understood this. He was weaponizing it with the precision of someone who'd studied how attention worked. And somewhere above, heaven was watching. That part interested Bayonetta most. Not Hell's reaction. Hell was predictable. Chaotic, violent, desperate for anything that suggested fighting back might work. But heaven operated differently. Heaven maintained systems, enforced order, responded to disruptions with calibrated force. Except Vox had just broadcast a disruption so large that calibration might not suffice. The pressure at the base of Bayonetta's skull intensified. A familiar weight. Inferno distant, but present, reminding her that time was currency and she was spending it poorly. She'd been away from her obligations for 48 hours. The leash wasn't just tightening anymore. It was beginning to pull. In the mirror above the dresser, her reflection flickered. Just for a moment. Just long enough to see something else looking back. Red eyes. Sharp angles. The echo of what waited when contracts came due. Bayonetta closed her eyes, counted to 3. Opened them again. Her reflection was normal. Tired, perhaps, but human. Mostly. The tablet continued streaming Vox's broadcast. He'd moved on to speculation about Heaven's potential responses. Each scenario more dramatic than the last, each one feeding the narrative that something big was coming. He wasn't wrong. Something was coming. Bayonetta could feel it the way some people felt weather changes. A shift in pressure, a thinning of boundaries between realms. Heaven wouldn't ignore this. They couldn't. Vox had made sure of that. The broadcast ended with a promise. Tomorrow, exclusive interviews with residents of Hazbin. First-hand accounts of what it's like living alongside the angel killer. Stay tuned. Bayonetta laughed. Actual laughter, sharp and brief. Vox had already conducted those interviews, she was certain. Already edited them. Already framed whatever answers he'd received into weapons against Charlie's narrative. Efficient. Ruthless. Entirely transparent to anyone paying attention. But most people didn't pay attention. They consumed. They believed. They let others do their thinking as long as the presentation was slick enough. She stood stretching muscles that ached from maintaining human form for extended periods. The pact didn't like dormancy. It preferred action. Movement. The completion of obligations, written in blood and witnessed by entities older than moral philosophy. Tomorrow she'd demonstrate. Just a small display. Nothing that would require full summoning. Just enough to show Charlie what professional obligation actually looked like. Not because she believed in what Charlie was building, but because watching idealism fracture under the weight of reality provided its own education. And maybe, just maybe, it would give Heaven something specific to respond to. Something that would force them to act rather than observe. Bayonetta had always preferred direct confrontation to prolonged uncertainty. At least fights had clear terms, clear outcomes, clear prices. This media warfare was messier, more insidious, harder to combat with the tools she understood. But Heaven she could work with. Heaven had rule structures, predictable responses to specific provocations. All she needed was to provoke them correctly. The tablet screen went dark. Vox had finished his broadcast. Across Pride Ring, conversations sparked. Arguments formed. Consensus shifted in the direction he'd carefully engineered. Bayonetta set the device aside. Tomorrow would bring new complications, new pressures, new choices about how long she could maintain this balancing act between Inferno's demands and her own curiosity. For tonight she had alcohol that tasted like regret and a window that overlooked a kingdom built on the premise that punishment was permanent. She wondered what Charlie would do when she realized that Vox was right. Not about intentions, but about optics. About how the gap between what you meant and what people believed could become too wide to bridge. Probably the same thing all idealists did when reality refused to cooperate. Double down, work harder, believe more intensely. It never worked, but it was admirably stubborn. Outside, somewhere in the layers between Pride Ring and whatever existed above it, mechanisms began to move. Heaven's bureaucracy processing information, assessing threats, deciding whether this disruption warranted correction. The answer was already determined. The question was only timing. Bayonetta felt it in the air. In the way shadows fell wrong, in the particular quality of silence that preceded violence. Soon, days not weeks, heaven would respond. And when they did, all of Vox's careful framing would become irrelevant. Because reality had a way of overwhelming narrative when actual conflict arrived. She almost felt sorry for him, building such an elegant story only to have it demolished by the very escalation he'd encouraged. Almost. But sympathy was expensive. And her budget for caring about other people's strategic failures was limited. Bayonetta finished the bottle Angel had left, felt the burn, welcomed the distraction from the cold spreading up her arms. Inferno was getting impatient. The contract was getting restless. Tomorrow's demonstration would buy her time, maybe a week, maybe less. After that, she'd have to choose. Stay and risk Inferno's collection, or leave and let Charlie face Heaven's retaliation alone. Neither option appealed. Both were inevitable. The price was always due. The only question was when and how much interest had accumulated. Bayonetta closed her eyes and tried to remember what it felt like before the contract, before the power, before the endless cycle of hunt and justify and hunt again. She couldn't. The memory was gone, buried under 20 years of fine print. Sleep, when it came, was brief and full of whispers in languages she'd never learned, but somehow understood perfectly. Inferno counting down, measuring debts, preparing to collect. In Vox Tower, the television executive reviewed tomorrow's content. Interviews with Hazbin residents edited to perfection. Each clip supporting his narrative. Each soundbite reinforcing the conclusion he wanted viewers to reach. Angel killer. Escalation. The inevitable clash between Hell's new confidence and Heaven's old authority. It would be beautiful, tragic, profitable. Vox scheduled the broadcast for dawn. Let Hell wake to fresh crisis, fresh uncertainty, fresh reasons to tune in for answers only he could provide. His processors hummed with satisfaction. This was what he was built for. Shaping perception, controlling narrative, making reality bend to accommodate better stories. Tomorrow Pride Ring would understand. Hazbin wasn't a haven for redemption. It was the spark that would ignite everything. And Vox would have the exclusive footage when it all burned down. So Chapter 3 is basically Vox going full troll mode. He edits Bayonetta's arrival into a scary trailer that makes Charlie look like a warlord recruiting an assassin instead of a hotel manager. It is honestly kind of funny. Alastair is standing there, clapping like a proud teacher, clearly enjoying how well the manipulation works, while Charlie is completely freaking out because she realizes something important. You cannot fight a cool video edit with calm facts, guys. Meanwhile, Bayonetta is just relaxing with a drink and watching everything on a tablet. She is not stressed at all. She knows Vox is accidentally helping her by scaring Heaven so badly that they will have to respond. That is exactly what she wants because her demon contracts are getting impatient and she needs a big fight to settle her debts before her soul gets taken. The irony here is wild. Vox thinks he is just making great reality TV and chasing views. In reality, he's pushing things toward an actual war. By making the hotel look too dangerous to ignore, he basically paints a target on the entire city. While Vox is celebrating his editing skills, Bayonetta is the only one who understands what just happened. He did not make content. He invited an airstrike. That's real insane. The siren started at dawn. Not the warning kind. The too late kind. The sound that meant targets had already been acquired and protocols were in motion. Vaggie hit the alarm 3 seconds after the first note. By the time Charlie reached the lobby, half the guests were already armed with whatever they could grab. Chairs, broken pipes. One sinner clutching a frying pan like it could stop divine retribution. Everyone to the reinforced sections. Charlie commanded, her voice carrying more authority than hope. Ground floor interior, away from windows. They're not coming for population control. Vaggie stood at the main window, spear ready, watching the sky. Look at the formation. They descended in precise geometry. Not scattered, not random. A spearhead aimed directly at the building's heart. 30, maybe 40. More organized than any previous incursion. They carried weapons Charlie had seen before, but something about the way they moved suggested this wasn't routine enforcement. This was punishment. "Where's Bayonetta?" Vaggie asked without turning. "Here." The witch appeared on the staircase, already moving with the fluid grace of someone who'd dressed for war while others were still processing panic. No visible weapons. She didn't need them. Her hands were tools enough. "How many?" 40 confirmed, more incoming. Formation type, assault, not dispersal. Bayonetta reached the bottom step, her expression shifting from casual interest to professional assessment. "They're aiming for structural collapse. They want the building down and everyone in it beneath rubble." "How do you know that?" "Because it's what I do." She walked to the window beside Vaggie. "Maximum symbolic impact, minimum prolonged engagement, one strike, total erasure." Charlie felt something cold settle in her chest. "We need to evacuate." "Too late. They're already blocking exits." Bayonetta pointed. Heaven's forces positioned at every door, every window, large enough for escape. "You're contained. The question is whether you fight or wait for collapse." "We fight." Charlie's hands clenched. "But we defend. We don't pursue. We don't escalate beyond what's necessary." Bayonetta's smile was brief and sharp. "Tell that to them when they're dropping the ceiling on your guests." The first impact hit the eastern wall. Angelic steel meeting reinforced brick. The sound was wrong. Too loud. Too final. This wasn't probing. This was demolition. Alastair materialized near the bar, his smile fixed, but his eyes tracking the damage. "How invigorating. They've upgraded from pest control to extermination with prejudice." "Can you reinforce the structure?" Charlie demanded. "I can make them regret touching it." Shadow tendrils spread from Alastair's feet, wrapping around support pillars. Not repair. Retribution. Anyone who struck the building would feel it strike back. Another impact. Western wall this time. Coordinated. They were testing structural weak points. Vaggie moved toward the door. "I'm going out there." "That's suicide," Angel Dust called from behind the bar. "It's tactics. If they breach, we're finished. Better to engage outside where we have room." She looked at Charlie. "You know I'm right." Charlie wanted to argue. Wanted to find the option that didn't involve watching people she cared about walk into violence. But Vaggie was right. Defense meant meeting the threat before it swallowed them whole. "Go, but come back." Vaggie kissed her. Quick. Desperate. A promise that might not survive the next hour. Then she was gone, bursting through the reinforced door with her spear leading. The battle outside erupted in sound and light. Angelic weapons clashing against defiance. Charlie moved to the window, watching Vaggie engage 3 attackers simultaneously. Her technique was clean, precise. Years of training meeting current desperation. But 3 became 5. 5 became 8. "She needs support," Husk muttered, already moving toward the armory they'd built after the last battle. "No!" Bayonetta's voice cut through the chaos. "She needs space, and I need targets." She stepped outside with the casualness of someone leaving for coffee. The air around her shimmered. Reality stuttered. Time didn't stop. It stretched, slowed. Witch time deployed like a weapon with edges. Her opponents moved through syrup. Their weapons swung with dream logic slowness. Bayonetta walked between their attacks, selecting targets with the efficiency of someone reading a contract's terms and conditions. Her first strike was almost gentle, a touch to her target's wrist. The bones shattered with the sound of breaking glass. It dropped its weapon. Bayonetta caught it mid-fall, reversed grip, drove it upward through the original owner's throat. Golden ichor sprayed. The body dissolved. Bayonetta was already moving. Charlie watched through the window, transfixed by the cold precision. This wasn't battle. It was execution. Methodical. Professional. Bayonetta eliminated threats the way surgeons remove tumors. Necessary. Efficient. Utterly without hesitation. "She's done this before," Angel Dust whispered. "She does it for a living," Husk corrected. "There's a difference between fighting and hunting. That's hunting." Witch Time released. Normal temporality snapped back. 5 were dead before their companions registered the threat. Bayonetta transitioned into conventional speed, her movements flowing between defensive evasion and surgical offense. Wicked weaves erupted from her hair. Massive demonic limbs materializing just long enough to crush, to break, to sweep enemies from the sky like insects. The manifestations lasted seconds. Just enough to eliminate targets, not enough to summon fully. Controlled, calculated, terrifyingly competent. Vaggie regrouped, bloodied but functional. "What the hell is she?" "Exactly what we needed," Charlie replied quietly. "And exactly what I was afraid of." Reinforcements descended. The initial wave had been reconnaissance. This was commitment. 20 fresh combatants, weapons-drawn formations tight. Alistor's shadows erupted from the hotel's foundation. Tendrils wrapped around combatants, dragging them toward walls that opened like mouths. Not killing, constraining, buying time for others to adapt. "Delightful," Alastor murmured. "They brought enough for everyone." Charlie moved to the door. Her hands ignited with red energy. Demonic power inherited from her father, rarely used, never comfortable. "I'm going out there," Charlie, Angel started. "They're destroying everything we built. I'm not watching from windows while other people fight for it." She stepped outside. The heat hit first. Angels burning with holy light, sinners burning with defiance. The air tasted like ozone and desperation. One turned toward her. Young, uncertain, weapon raised but grip wrong, hesitating. Charlie raised her hand. Fire coalesced. She could end this. One blast. The opponent would dissolve. One less threat. Its eyes were terrified. Charlie redirected. The blast hit the ground between them. A warning. Space. It stumbled backward, joining the retreat that was beginning to form at the perimeter. "Why didn't you finish it?" Bayonetta stood beside her, hair still writhing with residual demonic energy. "They're retreating. One of them is. The rest are regrouping." Bayonetta pointed. They were forming a new pattern. Not retreat. Reorganization. "You gave them time to adapt. I gave them a chance to leave. Same thing, and they're not taking it." They attacked in formation. Synchronized. Learning. Adapting to threats. Focusing fire on Alastor's shadows. Baiting Vaggie into overextension. Trying to separate Bayonetta from the group. Professional. This wasn't Heaven's standard enforcement. This was trained tactical response. Bayonetta's expression hardened. "They brought specialists." What does that mean? It means someone high enough in Heaven's command structure authorized this specifically. This isn't about maintaining order. This is about making examples. A lance of light speared toward Charlie. Bayonetta moved faster than thought, intercepting. The weapon shattered against her forearm. Its wielder received Bayonetta's boot to its sternum. Ribs cracked. The body fell. Bayonetta descended with it, finishing the execution with mechanical efficiency. Charlie felt something twist in her stomach. Not horror at the violence. Horror at how easily she was accepting it. "We can't keep this up." Vaggie panted, rejoining them. Her shoulder bled gold. Angelic weapon wound. Painful, but not fatal. "They're testing us. Wearing us down. Then we end it fast." Bayonetta's eyes tracked the battlefield, calculating vectors and vulnerabilities. "Charlie, can you create a perimeter barrier?" "Yes, for maybe 60 seconds. That's enough. Vaggie, when the barrier drops, pull everyone inside. Alastair, I need your shadows focused on structural reinforcement, not combat. And what will you be doing? Alastair asked with genuine curiosity. Demonstrating why they should have brought more forces. Charlie summoned the barrier. Crimson energy erupting in a hemisphere around the hotel. 60 seconds. Maybe less if they tested it hard. Bayonetta stepped outside the protection. Alone. Exposed. Waiting. They converged. All of them. Recognizing the primary threat. 20 combatants focused on a single target. Witch time deployed. The world slowed. Bayonetta moved through frozen space, her body a weapon with perfect edge alignment. She didn't fight the angels. She disassembled them. Joints separated. Weapons redirected into original owners. Holy light turned against divine flesh. Her hair expanded. Wicked weaves at full manifestation. Demonic arms the size of buildings swatting divine warriors from the sky. Crushing. Breaking. Reducing opponents to golden stains on rubble. This wasn't the restrained combat from before. This was capability uncapped. Power without apology. Charlie watched, transfixed and horrified. This was what Bayonetta had been holding back. This was the professional obligation she'd mentioned so clinically. An angel's scream cut short. Another dissolved. A third tried to flee. Bayonetta's hair caught it mid-escape, dragging it back to Earth for execution. The barrier dropped. 60 seconds expired. Bayonetta stood in the center of carnage. 20 divine warriors reduced to ichor and ash. Her breathing was steady. Her expression unchanged. She'd just eliminated a small army and looked like she'd finished a routine task. The survivors, the ones who'd hung back, the ones who'd thought they were safe in distance, fled. Not regrouping. Running. Raw retreat born of recognition that they'd engaged something outside acceptable risk parameters. Silence settled over the hotel's perimeter. Broken only by settling debris and the wet sound of ichor dripping from Bayonetta's hands. Charlie stepped out from behind the barrier. The bodies were already dissolving. Heaven's cleanup protocol. But the blood remained. Golden stains across concrete. Evidence that wouldn't fade quickly. You killed them all, Charlie whispered. I eliminated the immediate threat. Bayonetta wiped ichor from her glasses. The survivors will report that attacking this location carries unacceptable casualties. That's deterrence. That's massacre. That's survival. Bayonetta turned to face her. They came to collapse your building, to bury everyone inside, to make your establishment a crater and a warning. I stopped them. You're welcome. I didn't ask you to. Yes, you did. The moment you let me stay, the moment you didn't evacuate when you had the chance. You chose this. You just don't like what choosing looks like. Charlie wanted to argue, wanted to claim there had been another way. But the bodies dissolving around them suggested otherwise. Vaggie limped over, still bleeding. Hotel's intact. Guests are scared, but alive. Minimal casualties on our side. She looked at the golden stains. What did I miss? Efficiency, Alastair provided appearing from shadow. Our guest demonstrated why contracts with Inferno carry premium pricing. Bayonetta's hands trembled. Just slightly. Just enough for Charlie to notice. The witch clenched them, willing stillness. Are you hurt? Charlie asked. No, just payment come due. Bayonetta's voice was tight. Inferno enjoyed that. They always enjoy it when I work. Problem is they start getting ideas about frequency. A cold sensation crawled up Charlie's spine. What kind of ideas? The kind where they stop being passive beneficiaries and start being active participants. Bayonetta turned back toward the hotel. I need to rest. And you need to decide what you're going to tell everyone who just watched me turn divine warriors into landscaping. She walked inside without waiting for response. Her shadow on the ground moved wrong, stretched at angles that defied light sources. Something beneath the surface watching, waiting. Charlie looked at the dissolving bodies, at the golden blood, at the structural damage that would take weeks to repair, at the guests peeking through windows, their expressions mixing gratitude with terror. "She saved us," Vaggie stated quietly. "I know, but you're not happy about it. I'm grateful we're alive. I'm horrified at how easily she made that happen." Charlie's voice cracked slightly. She's been killing angels her whole adult life. This was just Tuesday for her. Does that make it wrong? It makes it. Charlie searched for words. Efficient, professional, exactly the kind of violence I wanted to prove we didn't need. Alastair's laugh crackled through the air. "My dear, you built a fortress and invited a weapon to stay. Did you truly believe you could maintain your moral high ground while standing on a foundation of practical necessity? I wanted to believe we could defend without becoming killers. You can defend without becoming murderers. But defense still requires bodies. The question is whether you prefer them to be yours or theirs." Alastair gestured to the dissolving remains. "Your guest simply ensures the mathematics favor your survival." Charlie wanted to argue, wanted to claim there was nuance Alastair was missing. But the dead angels suggested otherwise. Inside Vox Tower, cameras had captured everything. Every kill, every brutal efficiency, every moment of Bayonetta operating at capacity. Vox reviewed the footage with the expression of someone who'd just been handed a winning lottery ticket. This was better than he'd imagined, better than he'd scripted. The angel killer demonstrating exactly why heaven should be terrified. He began editing immediately, selecting angles, choosing moments of maximum impact. The graphic violence could be suggested rather than shown. The threat was more powerful when imagined. By evening, Pride Ring would understand. Hazbin wasn't a haven. It was an arsenal. And heaven had just learned that attacking it came with costs they might not be willing to pay. Vox scheduled the special report, added dramatic music, crafted headlines that stated facts while implying catastrophe. This was going to be beautiful television. Back at Hazbin, Bayonetta lay on her bed staring at the ceiling. Her hands still trembled. The cold spreading from her fingertips had reached her elbows. Inferno satisfied with the offering, demanding confirmation that more was coming. The whispers were louder now. Not words, just presence. The weight of entities that had tasted fresh kills and wanted another course. She'd bought maybe 3 days, 4 if she was lucky. After that, the pact would demand summoning. Real summoning. The kind that required permission from Inferno's deeper layers. The kind that opened doors she couldn't close alone. A knock interrupted her calculation. Soft, uncertain. "Charlie." "It's open." The princess entered her posture carrying the weight of someone trying to be diplomatic while wanting to scream. "We need to talk about how I saved your establishment, or about how uncomfortable it makes you that salvation looked like slaughter." Charlie flinched. "Both." Bayonetta sat up. "I warned you. I told you what I do. You chose to believe it could be managed, controlled, kept at a distance." She gestured to the window where golden stains still marked the courtyard. "That's what it looks like when I do my job. Efficient, brutal, necessary. Did it have to be that thorough? Yes. Half measures invite second attempts. Overwhelming response creates hesitation." Bayonetta's voice carried no apology. "They'll report back to heaven that Hazbin is defended by something outside standard threat assessment. That attacking it costs more than ignoring it. That's strategy. That's terror. That's survival in a system where mercy reads as weakness." Bayonetta stood walking to the window. "You want to redeem souls. Admirable. But you can't redeem ash. And that's what they were planning to make of this place. Ash and rubble and a lesson about challenging divine authority." Charlie's hands clenched. "There has to be another way." then find it. But understand that while you're searching for moral alternatives, people like me are keeping you alive long enough to look. Bayonetta turned back to face her. I don't need your approval. I don't require your comfort with my methods. I offered you honesty from the start. This is what honest looks like. Silence stretched between them. Outside, reconstruction had already begun. Sinners repairing damage. Life continuing because someone had been willing to ensure it could. Thank you, Charlie finally whispered, for keeping them alive. Even if I hate how you did it. You're welcome. Even though your gratitude doesn't change anything. Charlie left without another word. Bayonetta returned to her bed, to her trembling hands, to the cold that promised worse things if she didn't feed it soon. 3 days, maybe 4. Then, Inferno would demand its due. And Hell would learn that the cost of Bayonetta's protection was measured in futures she didn't control. Outside, Heaven's remaining forces regrouped beyond Pride Ring's borders. Reporting, analyzing, preparing recommendations that would reach higher authorities within hours. The message was clear. Standard enforcement had failed. The target location possessed defensive capabilities that exceeded acceptable risk for routine operations. Recommendation escalation protocols, overwhelming force, total elimination of the threat before it metastasized. Heaven's bureaucracy processed the request, considered implications, began mobilizing resources for a response that would make today's assault look like reconnaissance. The war had begun, not with declarations, with corpses and calculations. And somewhere between Hell's defiance and Heaven's pride, the only question that mattered was how many would die before either side admitted they'd created something neither could control. Chapter 4 is where Heaven finally stops playing nice. They send in a full strike team to wipe out the hotel. Things go bad fast, and Charlie is still trying to hold back and use non-lethal force, while holy lasers are flying everywhere. That is when Bayonetta finally steps in and gets to work. She activates witch time, and suddenly the whole fight changes. Everything slows down around her, and the battlefield turns into chaos in seconds. Well, it is brutal, but also extremely efficient, and it makes Vaggie look like she is fighting in slow motion. I think what makes it even more interesting is Alastor. He's not helping or stopping anything. He's just standing there, watching closely, almost like a proud dad taking notes. Meanwhile, Charlie is having a real crisis. She starts to understand that her peaceful approach does not work when the other side shows up with overwhelming force. And the dark humor comes from Vox. He is watching the whole fight and treating it like the best content he has ever seen. Now he can finally sell the story that the hotel is a terrorist base instead of a rehab center, which is exactly what Bayonetta warned would happen. Honestly, I think Bayonetta might be the most tragic character here. Everyone sees a flashy action hero, but she is actually paying a heavy price. The contract is hurting her, and every fight costs her more. Being that powerful is not freedom. It is like living on borrowed time with a demon bank that charges insane interest, and the bill is coming due a lot sooner than anyone wants to admit how funny it is. The second wave arrived 36 hours later. No warning sirens this time. Heaven had learned. They dropped from the sky in formation so tight, it looked choreographed. 40 combatants. No. 50. Weapons that gleamed with light that didn't belong in Hell's perpetual crimson. Angelic steel upgraded. Enhanced. Whatever they'd brought this time wasn't meant for containment. It was meant for erasure. Vaggie saw them first, cursing as she hit the alarm. They're targeting civilian sectors. East Quadrant. Residential. Charlie's blood went cold. How many people? Hundreds. Maybe thousands if they hit the shelters. Not the hotel. Not a strategic target. Just population centers. Maximum casualties. Minimum military value. This wasn't tactical assault. This was punishment through genocide. Bayonetta descended the stairs, already moving her posture, carrying the tension of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this scenario. They're forcing a choice. Defend here and let civilians die, or spread your forces and lose everything. We can't let them... I know. Bayonetta's voice was flat. Clinical. The tone of someone reading contract terms they'd hoped to avoid. That's why they're doing it. They're making you choose between your principles and your people. Charlie grabbed her jacket. Then we save both. You can't. Alastair materialized, his smile present, but strained. Split your defenders, and heaven eliminates them piecemeal. Concentrate here, and the civilians become statistics. Then what do you suggest? Bayonetta walked to the window, watching the assault unfold in the distance. Explosions bloomed like flowers made of light. Buildings collapsed. Screams carried on wind that shouldn't exist underground. I handle it. Alone, that's suicide. No, that's what I signed up for. Bayonetta turned back to face them. Her expression was empty. Not cold. Empty. The look of someone about to pay a debt they'd been avoiding for years. But I need you to understand something. What I'm about to do isn't clean. It isn't controlled. And it doesn't stop when the threat is eliminated. Charlie felt her throat tighten. What are you talking about? Infernal summoning. Full manifestation. I bring something through from the other side of my contract, and it does what it was bred to do. Bayonetta's hands clenched. Hunt, devour, destroy, in that order. Vaggie stepped forward. Can you control it? For a time, minutes, maybe an hour if I'm lucky. Bayonetta's voice didn't waver. After that, it becomes a question of whether I can close the door before something worse comes through. And if you can't, then hell gets a preview of Inferno, and neither of us wants that. The building shook. Closer this time. Heaven's forces were advancing, using civilian deaths as cover, forcing the timeline. Charlie's hands ignited with power she'd never wanted to use. There has to be another way. There was. 48 hours ago, when you could have evacuated everyone in range. Bayonetta walked toward the door. Now the only choice is how many die while we look for alternatives that don't exist. She was right. Charlie hated that she was right. Hated that the woman who'd walked into their establishment 3 days ago had just become the only thing standing between civilians and annihilation. Do it, Charlie whispered. But come back. Bayonetta paused at the threshold. I'll try. But if I don't make sure someone seals the breach. Inferno doesn't accept partial contracts. Then she was gone, moving through hell's streets with purpose that felt like watching an execution timer count down. Vaggie grabbed Charlie's shoulder. We should follow. No, she was clear. This is her obligation. We stay and defend what we can. And if she loses control... Charlie didn't answer. Because the answer was what everyone already knew. If Bayonetta lost control, hell's problems with heaven would become obsolete very quickly. Bayonetta reached the civilian sector in minutes. The devastation was worse than broadcasts suggested. Buildings reduced to frameworks, streets cratered, bodies both intact and very much not. Heaven's forces moved through the destruction with mechanical efficiency, eliminating survivors who'd made the mistake of trying to flee. Methodical, calculated, professional extermination. She counted the combatants. 60, maybe 70. More than she'd faced before, armed with weapons that hummed with energies designed specifically to counter infernal interference. They'd studied her, adapted, prepared, good. That meant they understood what was coming. Bayonetta closed her eyes, reached deep. Not to the surface powers she'd been using, to the foundation. The contract signed in blood at 16. The agreement that bound her to Inferno's hierarchy in exchange for strength that could challenge divinity. The words came automatically. Latin mixed with languages older than civilization. Her voice didn't rise. It descended. Dropping octaves until it resonated in frequencies that made reality uncomfortable. The air split, not like the rift she'd used to arrive. That had been a door. This was a wound. Reality tearing because something from outside the natural order was forcing its way through. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in a second. Frost formed on rubble. Blood froze mid-drip. Sinners who'd been hiding in ruins suddenly found themselves unable to breathe as Inferno's atmosphere leaked through the gap. And through that gap, something emerged. Madama Butterfly. Infernal demon. The entity Bayonetta's clan had bound themselves to generations ago. Massive. Draconic. Beautiful in the way that hurricanes were beautiful when viewed from orbit. It didn't land. It manifested. Flesh that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Wings that stretched across city blocks. Eyes that saw in spectrums hell didn't possess vocabulary to describe. And it was hungry. Heaven's forces turned as one, recognizing a threat magnitude they'd never encountered. Training met instinct. Instinct suggested retreat. Training demanded they hold formation. They chose formation. Madama Butterfly chose violence. It moved faster than its size suggested possible. One moment perched on ruined architecture. The next, sweeping through heaven's ranks like a hand through smoke. Except smoke didn't scream, didn't bleed light, didn't realize it was dying until it had already ceased. 5 combatants gone in the first pass, 10 in the second. Heaven's weapons fired. Holy energy lancing toward infernal flesh. The attacks connected, penetrated. Madama Butterfly didn't notice, or didn't care. Wounds that should have crippled merely annoyed. Bayonetta stood at the center of the summoning circle, maintaining the connection. Her hair was fully extended, woven into patterns that kept it anchored, focused. Aimed at heaven rather than indiscriminate slaughter. But the cost was immediate and severe. Her vision blurred. Witch time activated involuntarily, making the world stutter between normal speed and crawl. Her hands shook, not from exertion. From Inferno pulling at the connection, using her as a conduit to force more of itself through. The contract was hungry, always hungry, and feeding it never satisfied, only postponed. Madama Butterfly devoured another wave of attackers. Not eating, erasing, returning divine matter to component energies and distributing them to Inferno's deeper layers. Efficient, terrifying. Exactly what the entity had been designed to do. But it wasn't stopping at Heaven's forces. A building collapsed as its wing brushed it. Not attacked. Brushed. Incidental contact that reduced architecture to dust. Sinners who'd survived Heaven's assault found themselves facing something worse. Something that didn't distinguish between collateral and combatants. Bayonetta felt the control slipping. Her focus fractured between maintaining the anchor and simply staying conscious. The cold spreading through her body had reached her core. Inferno wasn't just using her anymore. It was evaluating, measuring, deciding whether to accept the current arrangement or renegotiate terms while she was vulnerable. "Focus," she muttered through gritted teeth. "Minutes. Just need minutes." Madama Butterfly roared. The sound existed in ranges that shattered glass and made bones vibrate. Heaven's remaining forces broke formation, raw survival instinct overriding orders. They fled, scattered, became easy prey for a predator designed to hunt entities considerably more dangerous than frightened warriors. It pursued, not out of tactical necessity, out of nature. It was what it did. What it had always done, what Inferno bred it to do. And Bayonetta was losing the leash. At Hazbin Hotel, Alastair stopped smiling. The absence was so sudden that Charlie noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" "Something is coming through that shouldn't." His voice had lost its theatrical flourish. What remained was old, dangerous, concerned in ways that didn't match his usual detachment. Not heaven, not hell, something else. The hotel windows rattled. Distant, but approaching. A pressure wave that had nothing to do with explosions and everything to do with dimensions, refusing to accommodate what was being forced through them. Vaggie moved to the window. What is that? The sky above the civilian sector had turned wrong. Not dark. Inverted. Like looking at a photograph's negative. And in that wrongness, something massive moved. Fought. Consumed. Charlie's throat went dry. Bayonetta. Bayonetta was the summoner. That is, the summoned. Alastor's expression was unreadable. And it's not going to stop when the threat is gone. It's going to keep feeding until someone forces it back. Can she force it back? I don't know. I've never seen anyone summon something that size and retain consciousness afterward. The pressure increased. Windows cracked. Foundations groaned. Not from proximity. From the sheer weight of Inferno's presence trying to establish beachhead in Hell's dimensional space. Overlords across Pride Ring felt it. Some fled, some fortified. Rosie called emergency meetings. Carmilla mobilized defensive positions. None of them had weapons that would matter if Inferno decided Hell was a better foothold than the barrier realms it currently occupied. In Vox Tower, every camera focused on the civilian sector went haywire. Static, distortion, feeds cutting to black and returning with images that couldn't exist. Its form refused to be captured properly. Every angle looked wrong. Every recording suggested something larger than what the lens could contain. Vox tried to edit, tried to frame, tried to control the narrative. The footage controlled him instead. Overwriting his edits, inserting frames he didn't capture, audio that spoke in frequencies his equipment couldn't record. For the first time in his existence as Pride Ring's media overlord, Vox encountered something that couldn't be spun, couldn't be framed, could only be witnessed and feared. He kept recording anyway, because stopping meant admitting defeat, and defeat wasn't part of his operating parameters. Back at the summoning site, Bayonetta collapsed to one knee. The connection was burning now. Witch time had abandoned subtlety. Reality around her flickered between states, past, present, future bleeding together as Inferno's presence destabilized temporal consistency. She could see herself at 16, signing the contract. Could see herself at 30, dead from failing to fulfill obligations. Could see herself now, trying to maintain control while something vast and ancient used her nervous system as a bridge. "Close the door," she whispered, commanding herself, commanding the creature, commanding Inferno itself. Madama Butterfly hesitated. Not obedience. Consideration. It had eliminated the threat. Heaven's forces were gone, fled, destroyed, removed from the tactical equation, but it was still hungry. Madama Butterfly turned toward denser population. Toward shelters full of sinners who'd survived both Heaven's assault and incidental collateral. Fresh targets. Fresh energy to feed Inferno's endless appetite. Bayonetta screamed. Not sound. Will. Forcing every ounce of power she had into the binding. The anchor. The contract terms that said she commanded, and it obeyed. It paused. Wings spread across the sector like a canopy of nightmares. Head turning toward its summoner with something that might have been curiosity, or might have been hunger, redirecting toward a closer target. Their eyes met. Bayonetta and the entity she'd been feeding since adolescence. Recognition passed between them. "You are mine," Bayonetta's will insisted. "You return when I command." Its response wasn't words, just presence. "I am yours when it benefits me. When it doesn't, you become mine." The standoff lasted 3 heartbeats. 3 eternities. 3 moments where hell's fate balanced on whether an Umbra Witch could enforce a contract against an entity that predated the concept of agreements. Bayonetta's hair contracted, snapping tight, dragging it backward, not gentle, not negotiated, forced. Physical manifestation of will overriding mass and appetite. Madame Butterfly resisted. Claws gouging reality. Wings beating against dimensional barriers. But the contract held. Barely. With damage that Bayonetta would carry for the rest of her considerably shortened life expectancy, it retreated. Not dismissed. Recalled. Pulled back through the wound it had entered from. Its last act was spreading wings one final time. Showboating. Reminding everyone watching that it chose to leave. Not because it had to. Because it wanted hell to know it could return whenever the summoner grew weak enough. The rift sealed. Reality sutured itself. Temperature normalized. Temporal stability reasserted. What remained was a sector reduced to rubble, a summoner bleeding from eyes and nose, and a population of sinners who'd just learned that hell had layers they'd been fortunate to never encounter. Bayonetta tried to stand. Failed. Tried again. Managed to get vertical through sheer stubbornness. Her reflection in broken glass showed someone who'd aged a decade in an hour. Hair streaked with premature white, eyes bloodshot. Skin carrying the pallor of someone who'd had their life force used as currency. She stumbled, caught herself. Began walking back toward the hotel. Each step required conscious effort. Each breath felt borrowed. Behind her, the civilian sector smoldered. Heaven's forces were gone. So were several buildings. So were an unknown number of sinners who'd been in the wrong place when Inferno made its introduction. The cost was paid. The obligation fulfilled. The contract satisfied. For now, Charlie met her at the hotel entrance. Took one look at Bayonetta's condition and moved to support her. "Don't," Bayonetta rasped. "I'm contaminated. Inferno residue. Give it an hour to dissipate." "You're injured." "I'm expensive." "There's a difference." Bayonetta leaned against the doorframe, her body making it clear that standing without support wasn't sustainable. How many died? "We don't know yet. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Better than tens of thousands if I'd waited." Charlie wanted to argue, wanted to say there had been another option. But the rubble told a different story. What was that thing? "Madama Butterfly, infernal demon, part of my clan's contract. One of many." "One of many," Charlie repeated, horror creeping into her voice. "How many can you summon?" "Doesn't matter. I can't summon anything else for weeks. Maybe months. That one nearly broke me." Bayonetta's laugh was bitter. Inferno got what it wanted. Angels, energy, a chance to remind hell that there are worse things than heaven's judgment. Vaggie approached cautiously. "Did it work? Did you stop them?" "I stopped this wave. They'll send more. Different weapons, different tactics, until eventually they send something I can't counter." Bayonetta's gaze was distant. That's how these things end. Not with victory, with exhaustion. Alastor appeared in the doorway, his smile returned but thinner. "Fascinating performance, though I suspect you've made several new enemies among Pride Ring's power structure. They don't appreciate being reminded of their insignificance. They'll survive the ego damage. Will you survive the physical damage?" Bayonetta didn't answer. Because the answer was uncertain. Summoning Madame Butterfly had cost more than she'd projected. The contract had taken liberties, extracted interest, left markers that suggested Inferno was prepared to collect more than originally agreed. She pushed past them, heading for her room. Each step sent pain lancing through her nervous system. Inferno's residue still burning in her bloodstream, the price continuing to accumulate even after the service was rendered. In her room, the angelic steel shard sat on the nightstand, inert, mundane, a reminder that divine didn't mean invincible. Bayonetta collapsed onto the bed, didn't bother undressing. barely managed to remove her glasses before unconsciousness claimed her. Sleep brought nightmares. Madame Butterfly waiting, watching, whispering in languages that made her spine ache. Inferno's deeper layers patient and hungry, counting the days until her contract came due in full. She'd bought Charlie's establishment time, maybe a week, maybe less, but the cost was becoming clear. Every summon brought her closer to the moment when she became what she commanded. When the contract inverted and Inferno collected not just service, but ownership. The fine print was always the same. Power now, payment later, no exceptions. And Bayonetta was running out of installments she could afford. Across Pride Ring, overlords gathered. Not formally, not organized, just mutual recognition that something had changed. Heaven could be fought, could be survived, could be negotiated with through sufficient violence. But what Bayonetta had brought through, that wasn't negotiable. That was a preview of what existed in spaces Hell's hierarchy had no authority over. Some demanded Bayonetta's removal. Some proposed alliances. Some simply fortified and hoped geography provided sufficient buffer. Rosie sent a message. Polite, pointed, requesting clarification on whether Hazbin Hotel was a shelter or a summoning circle. Carmilla mobilized weapon stockpiles, not against heaven, against the possibility that Inferno decided Hell was worth colonizing. And in the depths of Pride Ring, where older powers dwelt in spaces too dangerous for regular sinners, something stirred, noticed, began calculating whether the witch represented opportunity or threat. Hell had changed, not through Heaven's actions, through Hell's own decision to accept a guest who brought her own apocalypse. The war was no longer about redemption versus punishment. It was about survival, and the cost of choosing which extinction to accept. Chapter 5 is where Heaven completely stops playing fair. They start bombing civilians, clearly trying to force Charlie into an impossible choice between saving the hotel or protecting her people. That pressure finally pushes Bayonetta to drop the act. She summons Madame Butterfly, and the fight instantly turns into a full kaiju-level disaster. It is terrifying to watch because she barely has control over it. The power is there, but so is the risk. You know things are bad when Alastair actually stops smiling. That alone says everything. At the same time, Vox is losing his mind up in the tower because his cameras cannot even process what is happening. The demon is so massive and unstable that it literally breaks his reality TV setup. The craziest part is that Bayonetta is not just fighting Heaven. She is fighting her own contract. After the angels are dealt with, Madame Butterfly turns toward the city and almost starts attacking the neighbors. That moment makes it clear what the real cost is. Bayonetta's power is not free. It is like using a credit card with insane interest. Every time she relies on it, the debt gets worse, and she is barely holding things together before it consumes her completely. The meeting wasn't announced. Charlie simply gathered everyone in the main hall 3 days after the summoning. No breakfast routine, no pretense of normalcy. Just chairs arranged in a semicircle and an atmosphere that suggested decisions were about to become permanent. Bayonetta arrived last, still moving carefully. The infernal residue had faded from her skin, but the cost lingered. Premature white threaded through her hair. Dark circles marked sleepless nights spent negotiating with a contract that had opinions about restraint. She took a seat at the edge, not excluded, not quite included. Charlie stood at the center, her posture carrying the weight of someone who'd spent 72 hours deciding how to say something that would hurt. We need to talk about what happens next. About what this place is. About lines we're not crossing. Angel dust shifted uncomfortably. This feels ominous. It should. Charlie's voice was steady. Not angry, not accusing, just factual. Because what happened 3 days ago can't happen again. The room went quiet. Bayonetta kept her expression neutral, waiting for the conclusion she'd seen approaching since the moment Madame Butterfly had retreated.
What you did saved dimes.
Charlie continued addressing Bayonetta directly. Thousands of people are alive because you acted when no one else could. I'm grateful. But I can't let it happen again. You're banning summoning, Bayonetta stated. Not a question. I'm establishing that this hotel doesn't become a staging ground for apocalyptic interventions. Charlie's hands clenched. Heaven is watching. Hell is fragmenting. Every overlord in Pride Ring is deciding whether we're allies or threats. And Inferno just demonstrated that it has access to this location whenever you open that door. Vaggie stood beside Charlie's silent support. Alastair leaned against the far wall, observing with the detachment of someone watching a play he'd already read. So what are you proposing? Bayonetta's tone remained clinical. Professional, not defensive. That you stay. That you're still welcome here. But that you don't summon within Pride Ring's borders without unanimous consent from everyone in this room. Charlie gestured to the assembled group. And that if heaven attacks again, we defend with what we have, not with what we can drag through reality's wounds. Angel Dust raised a hand tentatively. So if they come back with bigger weapons, we just hope we're enough. We adapt. We coordinate. We use every resource that doesn't require making deals with dimensions that want to colonize hell. Charlie's voice didn't waver. I won't build redemption on top of infernal occupation, even if that means more casualties, Bayonetta asked quietly. Even then, Charlie met her gaze without flinching. Because if we win by becoming better at annihilation, then we've already lost what we were trying to protect. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Bayonetta recognized the conviction. She'd seen it before. In people who believed morality could outweigh mathematics. In idealists who thought principles trumped survival statistics. They were always sincere, always committed, always buried under the rubble of consequences. I understand, Bayonetta replied simply. Charlie blinked clearly, expecting resistance. You do. You're drawing boundaries. Establishing what you'll accept to win versus what winning would cost. It's rational. Bayonetta leaned back in her chair. I disagree with your assessment of acceptable losses, but I understand the logic. Will you respect it? The question hung between them. Bayonetta could feel Inferno stirring at the edges of her consciousness. The contract didn't appreciate restrictions, didn't accept barriers between obligation and opportunity within these walls. Yes. Bayonetta's voice carried careful precision. I won't summon here without consensus, but understand that if heaven escalates beyond what your current resources can handle, I will act. Not because I'm defying your authority, because my contract doesn't accept proximity to mass death as an excuse for inaction. Then you'll have to leave before that happens, Charlie stated. Because I can't let you override this decision, even with good intentions. Fair terms. Bayonetta stood slowly. Thank you for the honesty. It's rarer than people imagine. She walked toward the door, paused at the threshold. For what it's worth, I hope you're right. I hope your principles prove more durable than my experience suggests. Then she was gone, retreating to her room, while the meeting continued without her. Vaggie watched her leave. That went better than expected. Did it? Alastair's voice carried amusement without joy. She agreed because she knows you're wrong. She's seen this play out before. Idealism versus necessity. The idealist always loses. She's just being polite while she waits for you to realize it. We're not wrong, Charlie insisted. There has to be a way to defend ourselves without becoming the thing we're defending against. Perhaps. But hell has never rewarded that particular optimism. Alastair straightened. Still, I admire the attempt. It's very you. Husk poured himself a drink. So what happens when heaven comes back, and they will come back? They've escalated twice. Third time is usually the charm. We defend smarter. Carmilla has weapons. Overlords have resources. We build alliances that don't require infernal intervention. Charlie's jaw set. We prove that redemption doesn't need annihilation to survive. Angel Dust looked unconvinced, but didn't argue. The others exchanged glances that suggested varying degrees of skepticism, masked by loyalty. The meeting dissolved. People drifted back to routines that felt fragile. Breakfast had become debate. Dinner discussion of evacuation routes. The hotel was still standing, but the foundation had fractures that wouldn't close through force of will alone. In her room, Bayonetta sat at the window watching Pride Ring's eternal crimson sky. The cold in her fingertips had spread to her wrists. Inferno's patience was eroding. The contract had tolerated her restraint for 3 days. It wouldn't tolerate much longer. A knock interrupted her calculation. Vaggie. The rhythm was distinctive. "Come in." The former exorcist entered, spear conspicuously absent. This wasn't a threat. Just a conversation between two people who understood violence as a language. Charlie meant what she said. Vaggie began without preamble. "I know, but you don't agree." "No." Bayonetta turned from the window. "I think she's choosing martyrdom and calling it principle. But it's her establishment, her rules. I'll respect them until circumstances make compliance impossible." Vaggie leaned against the doorframe. "What happens when circumstances change?" "Then I'll be somewhere else. Far enough away that my actions don't implicate her choices." Bayonetta's voice carried no heat, just fact. "I'm not interested in forcing Charlie to compromise. But I'm also not interested in watching people die because someone needed their genocide to be philosophically pure. You think Heaven's next move will be that bad? I think Heaven's next move will be designed to make every previous assault look like reconnaissance." Bayonetta gestured to the courtyard below. "They've lost combatants, lost face, lost the narrative that they're invincible. The next escalation won't be about population control. It'll be about making an example so loud that no one in hell forgets it." Vaggie's expression tightened. "And if you're right, then Charlie will have to decide if her principles are worth the price Heaven extracts. And I'll have to decide if watching from a distance while knowing I could intervene is something I can live with." Bayonetta's hands clenched slightly. "We're both going to hate our choices. The question is, which regret we prefer." They stood in silence for a moment. Two warriors on opposite sides of an argument neither wanted to be having. "If you cross the line," Vaggie said quietly, "if you summon here after agreeing not to, I will stop you." "I know. Even if you're right. Even if it would save lives. Because what we're building here can't survive if agreements become negotiable." "I understand." Bayonetta met her gaze directly. "And I'll respect that right up until the moment where not acting means watching Charlie die. Then all agreements become irrelevant." Vaggie nodded slowly. "Fair enough." She left without further words. The door closed with soft finality. Bayonetta returned to the window. Below, sinners moved through their routines, trying to pretend hell was survivable through determination alone. She'd seen populations like this before. In cities facing divine retribution, in settlements that thought walls and hope could substitute for power. They always believed until the moment walls fell. Then they believed in whatever force arrived to extract them from consequences. The cold spread to her elbows. Inferno restless, hungry, annoyed that its investment was being constrained by mortals who didn't understand the terms of engagement. A whisper scraped across her consciousness. Not words, just pressure, presence. The contract asserting itself. "You hesitated." "I respected boundaries," Bayonetta murmured to the empty room. The response wasn't language, just sensation, disapproval. The weight of obligations unpaid and promises unkept. Inferno didn't recognize boundaries, only debts and the interest that accumulated when payments were delayed. Bayonetta closed her eyes, counted to 10, felt her heartbeat synchronize with something older than cardiovascular systems. The pact was getting aggressive. Soon it would stop suggesting and start demanding. And when that happened, Charlie's rules would become an interesting philosophical exercise with no practical authority. 3 days, maybe 4. Then Inferno would require feeding, whether Bayonetta was convenient to Hell's political landscape or not. Across Pride Ring, overlords convened in spaces they considered secure. Rosie hosted tea in her emporium. Carmilla fortified weapon stockpiles. Others simply watched and waited for clarity about whether Hazbin represented opportunity or liability. The consensus was fractured. Some saw Bayonetta as a resource, others a catalyst for destruction they didn't need. All agreed that whatever happened next would determine whether Hell maintained its current power structure or fragmented into territories defined by who could negotiate with forces beyond standard demonic hierarchy. In Vox Tower, the media overlord reviewed footage from the summoning for the 100th time. The distortion, the loss of control, the moment when his carefully curated narrative had been overwritten by something that refused to be framed. He'd edited what he could, spun the coverage toward Hazbin harbors dangerous elements, rather than Vox encountered something beyond his reach. But the cracks in his authority were visible to anyone paying attention. Velvet had noticed. Valentino had made comments. The V's hierarchy was experiencing pressure that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with competence. Vox scheduled a private meeting, not broadcast, not recorded. Just conversation among partners about whether their current strategy remained viable. The answer was increasingly obvious. But admitting it meant acknowledging that Pride Ring's media landscape had limits, that some stories were too large to control, that power had dimensions his equipment couldn't measure. Vox hated admitting limits, but he hated irrelevance more. At Hazbin Hotel, Charlie tried to sleep and failed. The meeting had gone as well as possible. Everyone had accepted the new rules. Bayonetta had agreed without theatrics. So why did it feel like she just made a catastrophic mistake? Because agreeing was easy. Compliance was simple. The test would come when heaven returned. When lives hung in balance between Charlie's principles and Bayonetta's capabilities. And Charlie wasn't naive enough to believe principles won those arguments. She'd seen the summoning, witnessed what Bayonetta could do when unconstrained. Madame Butterfly had been terrifying, but it had also been effective. Overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. The kind of intervention that saved thousands by sacrificing hundreds. Charlie wanted to believe there was another way. Wanted to trust that redemption could survive without becoming complicit in annihilation. But want and reality weren't always compatible. And Hell had never rewarded people who prioritized morality over survival. The thought kept her awake until dawn. When sleep finally came, it brought dreams of Hazbin Hotel reduced to rubble, of guests buried under collapsed architecture, of heaven's forces standing victorious, while she clutched principles that couldn't stop falling debris. She woke in cold sweat. Vaggie's arms around her and wondered if Bayonetta was right. If the witch had seen this exact scenario play out so many times that her cynicism was just pattern recognition. Morning arrived without resolution. The hotel continued its routines. Charlie made breakfast. Guests pretended everything was normal. Bayonetta stayed in her room conserving energy and negotiating with a contract that didn't accept excuses. But everyone felt it. The tension. The awareness that they'd reached a decision point without actually deciding anything. That Charlie's rules were untested. That Bayonetta's compliance was temporary. That Heaven's silence was tactical rather than permanent. Hell waited. Heaven prepared. Inferno calculated interest. And in the space between those forces, Hazbin Hotel tried to believe that choosing sides could be avoided through sufficient determination. It couldn't. But the illusion was comforting while it lasted. On the fourth morning after the meeting, Bayonetta woke to find infernal script burned into her left palm. Contract clauses she'd never agreed to. Terms that had been added while she slept. The message was clear. Inferno had decided patience was concluded. The next time violence arrived, the pact would enforce compliance, regardless of promises made to mortals who thought agreements with witches superseded obligations to entities older than mercy. Bayonetta stared at her palm. The script pulsed with heat that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with warning. She had maybe 2 days before the contract stopped suggesting and started compelling, before her choices became irrelevant, and Inferno claimed what it was owed through her whether she consented or not. 2 days to decide. Stay and risk violating Charlie's trust when compulsion arrived. Or leave and hope distance created enough buffer that Inferno's next collection didn't paint Hazbin Hotel in collateral. Neither option was good. Both were inevitable. The fine print was always the same. Power came with obligations. Obligations came with enforcement. And enforcement didn't accept moral complexity as valid currency. Bayonetta closed her fist. The script burned brighter. Inferno counting down. The choice was coming. And unlike Charlie's idealism, this one wouldn't be resolved through conviction or hope, only through blood. And the question of whose blood Inferno would accept as payment. So Chapter 6 is wild, right? It is basically Charlie holding the most stressful staff meeting you can imagine. She straight up bans the only weapon that actually works because she would rather lose with her morals than win using demon magic. That is such a Charlie move, and the moment she says it, you just know things are about to go wrong. What gets me is how Bayonetta reacts. She agrees to the rules like a calm adult and does not argue at all. But then later she tells Vaggie the truth. If things get serious, she is either breaking the rules or walking away. She is not going to stand there and watch people die for an idea that does not stop bullets. And of course, Alastor is loving all of this. He is basically watching a slow-motion disaster and enjoying every second. Meanwhile, Vaggie is stuck in the worst spot trying to support her girlfriend, while also knowing the math just does not work. The part that really scares me is what no one else seems to notice. Bayonetta is not just being polite. She is running out of time. Her demon contract is literally burning a countdown into her hand, and Inferno wants payment now. Honestly, I think Bayonetta is the real hero here. She is already planning to leave quietly before her demon debt blows up and ruins everything. Charlie talks about sacrifice, but Bayonetta is the one actually making it, and the clock is ticking towards something really bad. They came at midnight. Not with formations. Not with the organized assault that Pride Ring had learned to recognize. Just 20 divine warriors descending in surgical precision toward a single sector. Not random. Calculated. The targets weren't military, weren't strategic. They were symbolic. Every sinner who'd publicly declared allegiance to Hazbin's philosophy. Every reformed soul attempting redemption through Charlie's methods. Every voice that had spoken against heaven's authority over damnation's jurisdiction. Identified, located, eliminated. The first deaths happened before anyone at the hotel knew heaven had moved. A former overlord who'd renounced violence. Gone. A group attempting community service in the Glutton Quarter. Erased. A shelter housing sinners who believed second chances were possible. Reduced to ash and message. The communication was clear. Redemption wasn't rebellion, but inspiring others to question their damnation that crossed lines heaven wouldn't tolerate. Vaggie saw the pattern first. Monitoring feeds showed precision strikes across 13 locations, all connected to Hazbin's influence, all eliminated with clinical efficiency that suggested extensive surveillance and careful targeting. "They're not invading," she stated, her voice hollow. "They're pruning. removing anyone who might spread what we're trying to build. Charlie felt the ground drop from beneath her convictions. How many? Initial reports say hundreds, maybe 1,000 by the time they finish the list. We have to stop them with what they're scattered across Pride Ring. By the time we reach any single site, they'll have moved to 3 more. Vaggie's hands clenched. This is different. This is calculated genocide masquerading as precision. Charlie's mind raced through options. Resources, allies, anything that could counter an assault distributed across too many points to defend simultaneously. Carmilla's weapons are designed for concentrated defense, not citywide response. We'd need an army we don't have. The answer Charlie didn't want to acknowledge hung in the air between them. One person who could move fast enough, cover enough ground, eliminate threats before they completed their assignments. One person she'd explicitly forbidden from acting. No, Charlie whispered. I didn't say anything. You were thinking it. And the answer is no. Charlie's jaw set. We find another way. We coordinate. We adapt. But we don't break the boundary we established 3 days ago. Even if people die, even then. Because if we compromise the moment circumstances get difficult, then the boundary meant nothing. Vaggie wanted to argue. Wanted to point out that boundaries worked best when everyone involved agreed to respect them. Heaven clearly didn't. But Charlie's expression carried the weight of someone clinging to conviction. Because surrender meant admitting she'd built her dream on foundations that couldn't support reality. Then we do what we can, Vaggie said quietly. And we live with what we can't. They mobilized every resource available, coordinated with overlords who had territorial stakes, deployed weapons Carmilla provided, sent warnings through communication networks that still functioned. It wasn't enough. Reports continued flooding in. More deaths, more locations. Heaven's forces moved with the efficiency of executioners working from a prepared list. They weren't fighting. They were erasing. And every attempt to intercept them arrived minutes too late to matter. In her room, Bayonetta listened to the chaos through walls that couldn't muffle desperate coordination. The script burned into her palm, pulsed with heat that had nothing to do with temperature. The binding was approaching compulsion. Hours, not days. Soon her choices would become irrelevant. But that wasn't why she stood. She stood because below her window, sinners were dying for the crime of believing Charlie's message. Because heaven had decided that hope was rebellion. Because the boundary Charlie had drawn protected principles while people bled out in streets they'd considered safe. Bayonetta had seen this before. Rulers choosing moral purity over pragmatic intervention. Always convinced their ideals mattered more than casualties. Always surprised when the corpses piled higher than their righteousness could justify. She'd respected Charlie's rules. For 3 days she'd complied, stayed quiet, accepted limitations. But compliance had limits. And watching mass execution from a window while possessing the capability to stop it violated agreements older than the one she'd made with Charlie. Bayonetta grabbed her coat. Didn't summon, didn't prepare spectacle. Just moved toward the door with the cold certainty of someone about to break a promise for all the right reasons. Vaggie intercepted her in the hallway. Don't! People are dying. Charlie said no intervention. Charlie isn't watching them bleed. Bayonetta's voice carried no heat, just fact. I won't summon. Won't make this a show. I'm going to kill them quickly, quietly, and without dragging hell into Inferno's spotlight. Then I'll come back and accept whatever consequences Charlie decides are appropriate. She'll see it as betrayal. She'll see it as pragmatism overriding ideology, which it is. Bayonetta met Vaggie's gaze. I'm not asking permission. I'm informing you that I'm leaving. Stop me if you need to. But do it fast, because every second we debate is another person dying for Charlie's principles. Vaggie's spear remained lowered. Not agreement. just recognition that physically restraining Bayonetta would require force that might collapse the building. And the calculus of casualties didn't favor that outcome. 2 hours, Vaggie stated. Then I tell Charlie. Fair enough. Bayonetta was gone before Vaggie could reconsider, moving through Pride Ring with speed that bent perception. No witch time yet. Just movement refined through decades of hunting things faster than thought. She found the first target mid-execution. 3 divine warriors eliminating a shelter of reformed sinners. Methodical. Professional. Following orders without questioning whether those orders constituted genocide. Bayonetta didn't announce herself, didn't give warnings. Just eliminated them with the efficiency of someone who'd stopped angels before and found the process tedious rather than challenging. 3 down, 17 to go. She moved to the next location, then the next. Working through Heaven's hit list faster than they could complete it. Not fighting, executing. Turning their precision against them with interest compounded through superior speed and complete absence of hesitation. Witch time activated only when necessary. Brief flickers, enough to dodge incoming strikes, not enough to draw attention or require summoning. She was hunting, not performing. The distinction mattered. By the time Heaven's forces realized they were being countered, Bayonetta had eliminated 8 of their 20. The survivors adapted, grouped together, established defensive positions that made approaching without witch time suicidal. She adapted faster, used the environment, separated them through tactical pressure, forced mistakes through positioning that made their coordination a liability rather than strength. 15 down, 5 remaining. The last group fortified inside a building they'd already cleared of targets. Defensive position, elevated angles, clear sight lines that made approach without full deployment impossible. Bayonetta considered her options, counted the cost, made the calculation every professional makes when efficiency meets obstacles. She deployed wicked weaves, not full scale, just enough to breach the fortification. Minimal manifestation, surgical application. The building shook. Walls cracked. Divine warriors found themselves facing something they'd trained to resist, but never actually encountered at close range. The last 5 fell within 30 seconds. Bayonetta didn't linger, just confirmed elimination and moved back toward the hotel before Add to Heaven could deploy investigation teams. The entire operation took 90 minutes. Charlie's 2-hour buffer remained intact, but the evidence was undeniable. 20 divine warriors eliminated. Their mission incomplete. Targets survived. The mathematical efficiency screamed professional intervention, not lucky circumstance. Bayonetta returned through the hotel's service entrance. Found Charlie waiting in the kitchen. The princess's expression carried the particular exhaustion of someone who'd just spent 90 minutes coordinating defensive measures that hadn't mattered because the threat had evaporated through means she'd explicitly prohibited. You left, Charlie stated. I did. After I said no intervention. After you said no summoning without consensus. I didn't summon. I intervened. Bayonetta's tone remained neutral. Not defensive, just precise. 20 targets eliminated. Minimal collateral damage. No infernal deployment. No spectacle. Just technical application of capability you forbid because it made you uncomfortable. You betrayed my trust. I prioritized lives over agreements. If that's betrayal, I'm comfortable with the definition. Bayonetta removed her coat. How many died while I was gone? Charlie's silence was answer enough. The coordination efforts had saved some, but hundreds were gone before warnings reached them. Hundreds more would have joined them if Heaven's schedule had completed. That's not the point, Charlie whispered. It's exactly the point. You drew a line. I respected it until the line became a burial trench. Bayonetta's voice softened slightly. I'm not asking you to agree with my choice. I'm asking you to acknowledge that your principles have costs measured in bodies. And sometimes those costs are too high for people with my capabilities to accept. Then you can't stay here. The words hung heavy. Not anger, just logic. If Bayonetta wouldn't comply with boundaries, then her presence made those boundaries meaningless. I understand. Bayonetta headed toward the stairs. I'll be gone by morning, far enough that my actions won't implicate your establishment. Where will you go? Somewhere heaven can find me if they want revenge. Somewhere hell can ignore me if they prefer distance. Somewhere inferno can collect what it's owed without burning down your dream in the process. Charlie wanted to argue, wanted to say there was another option, but the logic was too clean. Bayonetta's presence had become incompatible with the hotel's philosophical foundation. Keeping her meant accepting that rules were suggestions rather than structures. I'm sorry, Charlie managed. Don't be. You made the choice you can live with. So did I. Bayonetta paused on the stairs. For what it's worth, I hope redemption proves possible. I hope your conviction outlasts hell's entropy. I hope Charlie Morningstar becomes the exception that rewrites how damnation works. But you don't believe it. I believe you believe it. That's rarer and more valuable than you realize. She disappeared upstairs. Charlie stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the weight of decisions that felt both right and catastrophically wrong. Vaggie found her 20 minutes later. The survivors are confirming. Someone intervened. Professional, fast, gone before anyone could identify specifics. It was her. I know. Vaggie's voice carried no judgment, just acknowledgement. She saved maybe 400 lives, maybe more. The shelters that survived were all ones heaven hadn't reached yet. She broke her word. She broke an agreement to save people you wanted to protect. I'm not saying she was right. I'm saying the math is complicated. Charlie sank into a chair. What am I supposed to do? Let her stay after she proved boundaries don't apply to her or send her away, knowing she's the only reason hundreds of people saw tomorrow. You're supposed to make the choice you can defend. Then live with the fact that every choice has bodies attached. Vaggie sat beside her. Welcome to leadership. It doesn't get easier. Across Pride Ring, overlords received reports about Heaven's aborted operation. The precision, the targeting, the sudden cessation that suggested external intervention nobody could identify. Some suspected Bayonetta. Others attributed it to Lucifer's shadow operatives. A few theorized coordinated resistance they hadn't noticed organizing. The consensus was simple. Heaven had tried to make an example and failed. That failure would require response. Escalation. A demonstration so overwhelming that no intervention could stop it. The war had entered a new phase, not extermination. Annihilation of symbols. And Hazbin Hotel had just become the most prominent symbol in hell. In Vox Tower footage analysis confirmed what surveillance couldn't capture clearly. Something fast, precise, lethal, operating in ranges their equipment struggled to track. Vox knew immediately. The signature matched the summoning incident. Same efficiency, same professional brutality, same utter disregard for appearing on camera. He scheduled an emergency meeting with the V's, not to discuss strategy, to discuss survival. Because if Heaven's next move targeted media infrastructure, Vox needed to decide whether protecting his empire was worth becoming collateral in a war between forces that didn't negotiate with broadcasters. The answer was increasingly obvious, but admitting it meant acknowledging limits he'd never wanted to accept. In her room, Bayonetta packed methodically, not fleeing, relocating, creating distance between her obligations and Charlie's establishment. The script on her palm burned brighter. The binding recognized what she'd done. Intervention without summoning. Efficiency without spectacle. That wasn't the agreement. The pact wanted pageantry, wanted display, wanted Inferno's power broadcast, so Hell understood exactly what kind of entities stood behind Umbra witches. Killing quietly meant cheating the contract's implicit terms. The explicit obligations remained fulfilled. But Inferno kept ledgers that tracked more than letter law compliance. The price was updating, interest accumulating. What had been manageable debt was becoming something else. Something that would require payment she hadn't budgeted. Soon, maybe days, maybe hours, the binding would stop tolerating cleverness and start demanding spectacle whether she consented or not. Bayonetta closed her eyes, felt the cold spreading from her palm up her forearm, counted heartbeats that synchronized with something older than cardiovascular function. 2 days maximum. Then the choice became Inferno's instead of hers. And when that happened, Charlie's rules would become irrelevant footnotes to a collection process that didn't accept moral philosophy as valid currency. She finished packing, left the angelic steel shard on the nightstand. A gift, a warning, a reminder that divine didn't mean invincible. By dawn, she'd be gone. Somewhere distant enough that her next obligation wouldn't paint Hazbin Hotel in collateral. But the damage was done. Heaven had learned that Hazbin's protector operated outside the establishment's boundaries. That Charlie's ideals were enforced by someone who didn't share them. That made Hazbin both vulnerable and dangerous. The worst possible combination. At sunrise, Charlie found Bayonetta's room empty except for the shard. No note, no explanation. Just absence and a piece of divine steel that proved nothing was truly immortal. She held the shard carefully, felt its weight, its permanence. The reminder that violence solved problems idealism couldn't touch. Outside Pride Ring tried to process what had happened. Heaven's surgical strike. The mysterious intervention. The message that redemption came with costs nobody had calculated. And somewhere beyond the visible spectrum of Hell's politics, mechanisms began moving. Heaven preparing escalation. Inferno preparing collection. Forces that didn't care about Charlie's boundaries or Bayonetta's compromises, converging on conclusions that would require everyone to choose sides they'd been avoiding. The war wasn't ending. It was sharpening, narrowing, becoming personal. And the only question left was whose principles would survive contact with necessity, whose convictions would endure past the moment when choosing between ideals and survival became unavoidable. Charlie stood at her window, watching dawn paint Pride Ring in shades that suggested hope. But hope was getting expensive, and the bills were coming due faster than anyone could pay. All right, so hear me out on Chapter 7 because this one is rough. So Heaven gets really petty here. Instead of attacking the hotel, they start assassinating Charlie's fans. It puts her in an impossible spot where she has to choose between her morals and real lives. And honestly, she chooses her morals. She tells everyone to stand down, and it is incredibly frustrating to watch. Even Vaggie looks like she wants to scream because the math just does not work. That is where Bayonetta steps in. She decides that being a polite guest matters less than stopping a genocide. She goes on this long speed run and wipes out the assassination squad. What makes it crazier is that she does it without using any big magic, almost like she is proving a point that she did not even need to go that far. And then the really tragic part hits. Charlie basically kicks her out after that. 400 people get saved, and somehow that is still a problem. It really shows that right now, Charlie cares more about following the rules than about the results, and that is a luxury she cannot afford. My personal theory is that Bayonetta wanted to leave anyway. She knows her demon contract is about to come due, and she does not want that moment to destroy the hotel. So she takes the blame, protects Charlie's feelings, and walks away quietly, even though she might be the most capable person in all of hell. The compulsion arrived at dawn, not gradually, not with warning. Just the sudden absence of choice as the binding activated terms Bayonetta had agreed to 20 years ago without understanding the addendum clauses that only appeared when payment came due. Her body, viewed without consulting her, stood, dressed, walked toward Pride Ring's center where dimensional barriers were thinnest and Inferno's reach strongest. She tried to stop, tried to redirect, found her muscles operating under authority that superseded nervous system commands. The script on her palm had spread, covered her entire arm now, glowing with heat that announced exactly what was happening to anyone, with eyes trained to recognize contractual enforcement. She was being collected. At Hazbin Hotel, Vaggie saw the reports first. Dimensional distortion building in the commercial sector, reality thinning at precise coordinates that suggested ritualistic preparation rather than random occurrence. Something's coming through, she stated, checking weapon readiness. Big, organized, not Heaven's signature. Charlie felt her stomach drop. Where? Center square, public space, maximum visibility. Vaggie's expression tightened. This isn't an attack. It's a demonstration. They mobilized quickly, gathered whoever could move fast enough, reached the square to find Bayonetta standing at the center of a circle that had drawn itself in languages older than damnation. Her posture was rigid, not resistance, compulsion holding her in place while Inferno prepared its collection. Bayonetta, Charlie called out. The witch's head turned. Slight movement, barely controlled. Don't interfere. This is contractual obligation. Your involvement creates complications I can't afford. What's happening? Payments due. Terms I agreed to. Consequences I delayed. Bayonetta's voice remained steady despite her body betraying autonomy. The binding decided patience was concluded. I'm being recalled to Inferno for renegotiation of service terms. The circle pulsed. Reality cracked. Not a rift, a door. Something on the other side pushing through with the inevitability of bureaucracy enforcing overdue accounts. Charlie stepped forward. Vaggie grabbed her arm. Don't. You can't negotiate with that. I can try. No, you can witness. There's a difference. Vaggie's grip tightened. Some agreements exist outside your jurisdiction. This is one of them. The door opened. What emerged wasn't a creature, wasn't a being. Just presence, authority. The manifestation of contractual obligation, given form sufficient to extract what was owed. It didn't speak, didn't need to. The circle's script updated in real time. New terms appearing. Clauses that had been waiting for specific triggers. Bayonetta read them with the expression of someone discovering exactly how badly they'd been outmaneuvered by entities that counted patience in centuries. Interesting addendum, she muttered. I should have hired a lawyer. The presence extended something that might have been a hand, might have been a concept. Reached toward Bayonetta with the certainty of repo agents who'd never failed a collection. Charlie couldn't watch this. Couldn't stand idle while someone who'd saved hundreds got dragged into dimensions that didn't answer to mercy. Stop. The presence paused. Not obeying. Curious. Mortal interruption was irregular enough to warrant brief attention. She fulfilled her obligations. Charlie continued, voice shaking but firm. She hunted. She killed. She fed Inferno exactly what the agreement required. You can't just take her for following the contract. The script updated again. New text appearing in response. Charlie couldn't read the language, but Bayonetta could. Her expression shifted to something between surprise and grim amusement. It says I followed the letter while violating the spirit. Killed without spectacle. Intervened without permission. Delayed summoning past optimal feeding windows. Bayonetta's voice carried dark humor. Apparently efficiency isn't a valid excuse for boring performance. That's insane. That's hell. Just higher management. Bayonetta met Charlie's gaze. Thank you for trying. But this is my debt. My signature. My consequences. The presence moved to complete collection. Charlie felt helpless fury building. All her principles, all her conviction about redemption and second chances. None of it mattered when faced with contracts signed before those ideals existed. Then reality shifted again. Different signature, older authority. Presence that made Inferno's collector pause, not from fear but from recognition of jurisdictional complexity. Lucifer arrived without fanfare. Just stepped into the circle like entering his own office, which technically he was. Hell belonged to him even if he'd stopped managing it centuries ago. "This is irregular," Lucifer stated calmly, addressing the collector. "Collection enforcement in my domain requires filing notice. I don't recall receiving appropriate documentation." The script flickered. Updated. Displayed something that made Lucifer's expression tighten. "Pre-existing agreement supersedes territorial jurisdiction," he read aloud. "Signed before current management. Grandfathered under original terms." He looked at Bayonetta. "When exactly did you sign this?" 16. Desperate. Didn't read the fine print about enforcement protocols. "No one does." Lucifer turned back to the collector. "However, the entity you're collecting has become politically significant to Hell's current stability. Her removal creates complications that affect my domain's functionality. I'm invoking Dispute Resolution Clause 7. The presence didn't move, just waited. Patient. It had been doing this longer than civilizations had existed. Legal challenges were expected. "I'm not blocking collection," Lucifer clarified. "I'm requesting debt transfer. Hell assumes the obligation. Bayonetta's service requirements shift to my authority. Inferno receives equivalent compensation through alternate channels." Charlie's throat tightened. "Dad, what are you offering?" "Territory. Specifically the sector where Inferno's presence leaked during the summoning incident. It's already contaminated. Might as well formalize the claim." Lucifer's voice remained neutral, professional. "One contaminated zone in exchange for one Umbra witch reassigned to Hell's jurisdiction. Fair market value." The script blazed. Calculations appearing faster than reading could track. Inferno processing the offer, determining value, deciding whether trading immediate collection for long-term territorial gain served its interests. The answer appeared. Single word that Bayonetta translated, despite not wanting to. "Accepted, with conditions." "Always conditions?" Lucifer muttered. "What does it want?" Bayonetta read the new terms. Her expression went carefully blank. "I keep my capabilities. But summon authority transfers to Hell's management, meaning you. I can't call Inferno without your explicit permission. Witch time remains mine. Combat skills stay. But the Pact's enforcement mechanism now answers to different administration. Essentially, you become my employee," Lucifer summarized. "Essentially, I trade one leash for another." Bayonetta's voice carried resignation. "Though your leash probably comes with better working conditions. Marginally, I don't require spectacle." Lucifer looked at Charlie. "Is this acceptable to you?" Charlie realized the question carried weight beyond surface meaning. Her father was asking if she could live with having someone like Bayonetta under Hell's authority. Someone who'd broken Charlie's trust. Someone who'd also saved lives Charlie couldn't protect. Will she still have autonomy? Within parameters, she won't be compelled. Just constrained. Lucifer's gaze shifted to Bayonetta. "You'd essentially have the same freedom you had here, minus the ability to summon apocalyptic manifestations without management approval." "Sounds like most employment contracts," Bayonetta replied. "I accept. Better than being dragged to Inferno's deeper layers for eternity of servitude without parole." The collector extended toward Lucifer. Not attacking, finalizing. The transfer required physical contact. Agreement sealed through touch that bound authorities neither party would violate casually. They made contact. The circle flared. Script rewrote itself in real time. Old terms dissolving, new obligations forming. Bayonetta gasped as the binding shifted. The script on her arm burned away, reformed. New patterns, different ownership, same chains with updated management. The collector withdrew. Not defeated. Transaction completed. It had come for payment, received equivalent value. The form didn't matter, only the balance sheet. The presence faded. The circle dissolved. What remained was Bayonetta kneeling in the square, Lucifer looking weary, and Charlie trying to process what had just happened. "You're staying," Charlie whispered. "In a sense." Bayonetta stood slowly, testing movement, confirming the compulsion had ended. "Though not at your establishment. Can't exactly return after being asked to leave. That was before. Before it doesn't matter. You drew a boundary. I crossed it. The logical consequence was exile." Bayonetta's voice softened slightly. "I don't blame you. You chose principles. I chose pragmatism. Neither of us was wrong. We just couldn't coexist." Lucifer cleared his throat. "This is touching, but we have logistics to address. Bayonetta, you'll need quarters, security clearance, assignment parameters, the usual onboarding for entities with apocalyptic capabilities. Bureaucracy, my favorite." Bayonetta's sarcasm was gentle, almost affectionate. "Lead the way, boss." They walked away together. Lucifer already discussing protocols. Bayonetta responding with the professionalism of someone who'd changed employers before and understood the adjustment period. Charlie stood in the empty square, Vaggie beside her. The space where cosmic forces had just negotiated mortal fate now looked ordinary. Just another location in hell where extraordinary things became routine. "She saved herself," Vaggie observed. "Dad saved her. Same thing, she survived. That's what matters." Charlie wanted to argue. Wanted to say survival wasn't the only metric. But watching Bayonetta walk away under new authority made the argument feel hollow. The witch had paid her debt, just not the way Inferno expected. And Charlie's ideals had survived, just not without compromise. At Hazbin Hotel, life continued with the particular awkwardness of knowing someone important had left. Guests asked questions. Charlie provided answers that felt true without being complete. Bayonetta had moved on. Different obligations, different employer. Still in Pride Ring, but no longer their responsibility. Some guests understood. Others didn't. Angel Dust summarized it best. "So the badass witch who saved our asses is now working for Charlie's dad instead of hanging out here. That's just corporate restructuring with more magic." Husk poured drinks. "Everything in hell is corporate restructuring with more magic." Alastor appeared in the lobby, his smile fully restored. "How delightful. The prodigal enforcer has been reassigned to official management. I haven't seen Lucifer take personal interest in recruitment since the Overlord Wars." "Is that a problem?" Charlie asked. "Problem number fascinating." "Absolutely. Your father just acquired an asset that makes most of Hell's power structure nervous. The political implications are exquisite. I thought you didn't care about politics. I don't care about participating. Observing, however, remains endlessly entertaining." Alastor's eyes glinted, particularly when the observation confirms what I've always known. Idealism doesn't win wars. It just determines what you're willing to sacrifice to avoid losing. Charlie wanted to disagree. But the empty chair where Bayonetta used to sit during breakfast made the rebuttal difficult. Days passed. The hotel found new equilibrium. Charlie continued her mission. Vaggie maintained security. Guests cycled through various stages of attempting improvement, while hell remained hell around them. Reports filtered in about heaven's response to recent events. They'd stopped attacking. Not from fear, from assessment. The surgical strike had been partially countered. Hazbin had survived. But the hotel's protector now worked for Hell's official authority rather than operating independently. That changed calculations. Made targeting Hazbin equivalent to targeting Lucifer's interests. Escalation potential increased dramatically. Heaven chose patience. Let Hell stabilize. Observe whether redemption proved sustainable without requiring intervention that justified escalation everyone preferred to avoid. Silence settled. Uneasy, temporary, but preferable to alternatives. In Lucifer's tower, Bayonetta adjusted to new employment. The work wasn't different. Just the reporting structure. She still hunted things that needed hunting. Still applied capabilities most entities couldn't match. Just filed paperwork afterward. The binding felt different. Lighter in some ways, more constrained in others. She couldn't summon without permission. But she also wasn't being passively drained by Inferno's constant hunger. The trade-off was manageable. Lucifer proved a tolerable employer. Distant, professional, didn't micromanage, just set parameters and trusted competence. The working relationship functioned through mutual recognition that neither party wanted drama. Your daughter still thinks she can save everyone, Bayonetta mentioned during a briefing. I know. It's going to get her hurt. I know. But you're not going to stop her. Would you? Lucifer's expression carried the weariness of someone who'd watched idealism crash against reality for millennia. She needs to learn limitations through experience. Parental intervention just delays the lesson. Harsh. Necessary. Hell doesn't accommodate coddled rulers. Bayonetta understood. Didn't agree entirely, but understood. Sometimes the only way to learn cost was paying it personally. She looked out the tower window toward Hazbin Hotel. Visible from this height. Small, vulnerable. Stubborn symbol refusing to acknowledge its own fragility. Think she'll make it. Make what redemption? Functional, unlikely. Survival, perhaps. Lucifer joined her at the window. She has something most rulers lack. Genuine conviction. That's worth more than most people realize. Even when conviction gets people killed, especially then. Because it means the deaths matter. They're not just casualties. They're costs someone actually counted before choosing anyway. They stood in silence. Two entities bound by obligations they'd never escape. Watching an idealist try to build something neither believed could last. But hoping anyway, because hope cost nothing and occasionally proved surprisingly durable. Below, Charlie made breakfast, welcomed new guests, explained redemption to people who mostly came for shelter rather than salvation, maintained routines that suggested normalcy while knowing nothing about their situation was normal. But she continued, because that's what conviction meant. Not certainty of success, just refusal to stop trying. Vaggie watched her girlfriend work, saw the exhaustion beneath determination. Knew Charlie was processing losses she wouldn't discuss. Boundaries that hadn't held. Trust that had fractured. You okay? Vaggie asked quietly. I don't know. Ask me in a year. Charlie managed to smile. We're still standing. The hotel's functional. People are trying. That counts for something. Or even without Bayonetta. Especially without her. We need to prove redemption works without requiring apocalyptic intervention. Otherwise, we're just another power structure hiding behind moral language. Vaggie kissed her forehead. You're going to drive yourself crazy with impossible standards. Probably, but it's my crazy, my standards, my choice. Charlie leaned into the contact. I just hope it's enough. Across Pride Ring, overlords recalibrated strategies. Vox restructured programming. Carmilla updated weapon distribution. Life continued with the particular resilience of Hell adapting to new variables. The war with Heaven remained paused, not ended. Just temporarily suspended while both sides determined whether escalation served their interests. Inferno retained its contaminated sector. Gained foothold that would grow given time. Patient investment in territory that might eventually yield more than one Umbra Witch's service had provided. And in the spaces between these forces, individual souls continued trying to survive. Some pursuing redemption, others just seeking stability, all navigating reality that didn't care about their preferences. The story didn't end. Just reached a pause point where accounts were temporarily settled and new debts hadn't fully accumulated. Bayonetta stood on Lucifer's balcony, feeling wind that shouldn't exist underground. The binding on her arm pulsed with different rhythm now. Hell's authority instead of Inferno's hunger. Same constraint. Different management. Better benefits package. She thought about Charlie. About idealism that refused to bend. About principles that survived contact with necessity. By accepting modification rather than maintaining purity. Maybe that was the real lesson. Not that conviction was wrong, just that it cost more than anyone expected. And payment came in forms nobody wanted to acknowledge. The fine print was always the same. Power required price. Safety needed sacrifice. Survival demanded choices that made maintaining innocence impossible. She'd paid her debt, just not the way she'd expected. And Charlie had kept her principles, just not without learning their weight. Neither outcome was victory, neither was defeat, just existence in hell, where nothing was fair, nothing was pure, and the only real question was what you were willing to lose to keep standing. Bayonetta smiled slightly, turned from the window, went back to work. Because that's what employment meant. Show up, do the job, accept that perfect outcomes were fantasy and functional ones required compromise. Hell was forever, but terms were negotiable for those willing to read the fine print. And occasionally, very rarely, someone brave or foolish enough to keep trying despite knowing exactly how expensive hope could be. Charlie would continue. Bayonetta would watch from distance. Lucifer would manage from his tower. Heaven would observe from above. And hell would remain hell. Eternal, ruthless, surprisingly flexible for the right price. The story didn't end. It just changed management. Adjusted terms. Recalculated who owed what to whom. And in that recalculation, something unexpected survived. Not redemption, not salvation. Just the stubborn refusal to stop trying. Even when trying cost everything. Especially when it cost everything. Because that's what made it matter. Now she works for Lucifer instead of working alone. And of course, Alastor finds that whole situation hilarious. When you step back, it actually feels like the perfect ending. Charlie only keeps her dream alive because her dad pays a price she could not afford. And Bayonetta leaving the hotel makes sense. She was never meant to be a patient. She was there to show Charlie that hell is forever, but the rules can always be bent if you know the right people. And that ends our story for today. Thanks for all your attention. See y'all soon.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and be sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss our future video. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.